Hello, and welcome to the first video of a new series we're going to be trying out over the next few weeks, Smugglers' Tales. These videos will be different from what you're used to if you're a regular viewer of this channel, so we felt it best to explain what we'll be doing here before launching into things. Smugglers' Tales will be told from a strictly in-universe perspective, with lots of ambience and atmosphere, each focusing on a topic that might otherwise be too small or too obscure for a regular video. There's stories that you might hear from smugglers at the many cantinas of the Star Wars universe, and we're going to be presenting them exactly like that. All the information in these videos will still be accurate to legends and sometimes canon. We're still not going to be inventing details or anything, though we will present certain details that wouldn't be public knowledge as myths or hearsay to maintain that in-universe perspective. We hope you're as excited about this new series as we are, and with that out of the way, let's begin. Welcome to Tatooine. If you were looking to get as far from galactic civilization as possible, you couldn't have picked a better port. Just kidding. Contrary to the complaints of the local teenagers, Tatooine's not that obscure. It's no Coruscant, to be sure, but anyone flying the Outer Rim lanes is bound to stop here at least once. Of course, if they can help it, they're also bound to leave just as quickly. Because there's one thing about Tatooine you should always keep in mind. It's hostile to outsiders. The planet itself is pretty damn inhospitable. Only a small slice of the northern hemisphere is really habitable. The locals either keep to themselves or would kill you as soon as look at you, the sand people especially. And in the deep desert, in the heart of the Dune Sea, there are monsters whose names are rightly feared across the galaxy. You've probably heard of the Krayt Dragon before. Many people have, but far fewer know much about them. And if you're looking to travel out in the Dune Sea, you'd better get your facts straight. So sit down, have a drink, and I'll tell you all about Tatooine's most vicious predator. If you're looking to learn about any given planet, it's always best to talk to the locals. On Tatooine, though, it matters what locals you choose to talk to. The spaceports are full of some of the galaxy's worst scum, and many of them will happily spin up a convincing lie to grease a few credits free from a gullible traveler. The moisture farmers and rural settlers aren't as given to deception, but they know precious little beyond their narrow fields of expertise. By and large, you shouldn't expect to get anything useful out of Tatooine's settlers, especially when they're talking about things like Krayt dragons. Lots of settlers claim to have caught glimpses of dragons, but you could probably count on your hands how many of them have actually seen one. The Jawas would be a better bet, though they can be hard to understand. They say their language is partly pheromone-based, and that they communicate with outsiders using a clunky trade language. And whether or not that's true, even translation droids can struggle with their language sometimes. But just because they can be hard to understand doesn't mean they aren't saying anything worth understanding. The Jawas have been here forever, and they've got a long cultural memory. They know far more about Tatooine's environment, creatures, and history than any settler, that's for sure. You might get some good info about Krayt dragons out of them, but Jawas tend to avoid Krayt dragons if at all possible. A wise choice on their part. You do best to talk to the only people on this planet who regularly battle the monsters. The sand people. Of course, that's easier said than done. The sand people hate outsiders and usually try to kill any they see on sight. They have an ancient blood feud with the settlers here, you see, and it takes some real convincing to just survive a hello. But the Sand People are, nonetheless, the leading experts on Krayt dragons. Their greatest warriors strive to slay one, and bring back a dragon pearl, and the various tribes often have to contend with krayt dragons hunting their banthas. It's from the stories of their warriors that we get most of our knowledge about these beasts. That, and venturing out into the wastelands ourselves. Krayt dragons often hunt in the vast, open wastes of the Dune Seas, but they actually make their lairs in the mountainous regions between the desert basins. Highland regions like the Jundland Wastes are dotted with large caves that are ideal for krayt dragons to live in. The Laguna Caves near Mos Espa are a good example of an ideal krayt dragon lair. Or they would be, if it weren't for the pod racers tearing through and waking up the local dragons every year. Krayt dragons spend the bulk of their lives hibernating in these lairs, only leaving to mate or hunt. When they hunt, they feast, and one meal can sustain a dragon for quite some time. Krayt dragons eat all sorts of animals, though their preferred prey are banthas, which is why they come into conflict with the Sand People so much. Krayt dragon mating season is in the summer, and it involves krayt dragons from all over gathering in the canyons to, well, mate. Mating season is probably your best chance of seeing a krayt dragon, but it's also an extraordinarily bad idea to go looking for a dangerous apex predator while it's overpoweringly horny, so maybe pick a different season for your hunt. During the summer, the canyons of Tatooine erupt with the frenzied howls of mating krayt dragons, a sound fearsome enough to make even sand people scatter in fear. If you're smart, you'll do the same if you ever hear such a thing. Given that they're reptiles, krayt dragons are born from eggs. It's unknown how long they live or even how long it takes for them to grow to maturity, but they never stop growing until they die. The bigger a dragon is, the older it is. Krayt dragons aren't immortal though, and when they do eventually start to die, they like to gather in one particular valley, the krayt graveyard. No one knows why, but they've clearly been doing it for a while because the valley is choked with krayt dragon bones. They say it's full of pearls too, but that's just hearsay. Very few have ever returned from the krayt graveyard alive. The most well-known kind of krayt dragon is the canyon krayt, which is by far more common. You'd never guess from the name, but these dragons tend to hunt through the canyons and valleys of the highlands they call home. Despite being reptiles, they tend to prefer the shade, though they've been seen hunting both in the day and at night. Once in a blue moon, a canyon krayt will venture out into the open desert. If you see one out in the open, be extra careful. Odds are it's hunting outside its usual range due to a lack of food, and even the smaller canyon krayts will devour you without a second thought. Canyon krayts are on the smaller side for krayt dragons, but they're still pretty damn big. On average, they're about 30 meters in length, and they mostly just look like enormous lizards. They're completely covered in yellow-green scales so tough they're blaster resistant. They've got a ridge of dorsal fins running along their backs and a crest of horns on their heads, which are sharp and potentially dangerous. Canyon krayt dragons walk around on all four legs, and they've got long tails that are usually forked at the end. They've also got sharp claws that can rend durasteel, and their teeth are even sharper. They'll make a meal out of your land speeder if you let them, and no armor in the galaxy is strong enough to protect you from a krayt dragon's bite. Despite their sharp teeth though, krayt dragons don't chew their food, they swallow their prey whole. If you think you'd be too tough for them, think again. They also swallow boulders that they store in their gizzards to help grind their food down until it can be digested. These boulders are in turn smoothed out by the krayt dragon's stomach acids, becoming one of the most sought-after treasures in the galaxy. Krayt dragon pearls. Even the smaller pearls from canyon krayts are priceless, and I've heard that they can even be used as lightsaber crystals if refined properly. Good luck getting one though. If you want a dragon pearl, you have to kill a crate dragon, which is easier said than done. There are techniques that make the job easier, however. Crate dragons struggle to figure out 2D images, and they can easily be baited into attacking shadows. They also don't have much restraint when it comes to hunting. Bring a few banthas to the mouth of a crate dragon's lair, and you're bound to lure it out. Lastly, the canyon crate does have a single weak point in its armor. If you can manage to fire a shot right up its nose, it will go through the dragon's sinus cavity and into its brain, killing it instantly. It should go without saying that this is extremely hard to pull off, but nonetheless, this technique has allowed the galaxy's best hunters to fell canyon crates with some reliability. But the canyon crate dragon is just the tip of the iceberg. A far larger and far more dangerous kind of dragon can also be found on Tatooine. The greater crate dragon is the true apex predator of Tatooine, one of the most fearsome monsters in the galaxy. They're extremely rare, but there's debate over whether that's because there aren't many of them or because very few people survive an encounter with one. They can grow to be over 100 meters in length, and they need 10 to 16 legs to support their enormous bodies. Their tails are long and barbed, and their necks are long too, while their heads are packed full of sharp teeth. These monsters actually swim through the sands of the Dune Sea, a technique that allows them to sneak up on their prey. It also means that it's very rare to actually see one in full. Greater crates are considerably tougher than canyon crates, and they're also far more dangerous. Part of this is because of their size, part of it is because of their ambush tactics, but the biggest reason these monsters are so dangerous is because of their venom. Greater crate dragons spray acidic venom from their mouths, which can kill on contact. Apart from these differences, the greater crate is a lot like its canyon-dwelling cousin, with similar hibernation cycles, mating practices, and the same compulsion to die in the crate graveyard. Banthas are also the favorite food of the greater crate, though these leviathans have been known to prey on sarlaccs as well. And like the canyon crate, the gizzards of the greater crate dragon contain pearls, which are much larger and thus much more valuable than those of their smaller cousins. Good luck getting such a pearl though. The greater crate dragon is all but unkillable. Even the sand people can only manage it when working together as a tribe. Any solo hunter going after a greater crate dragon is doomed to end up as dragon food. All told, the crate dragon is one of the most fearsome predators in the galaxy. If you're intent on hunting one, I wish you luck, but I think the Jawas have the right idea about these monsters. Some beasts are just not meant to be messed with. Hello again. Good to have you back. I've got stories from another forest planet for you today. Felucia, if you've heard of it. Felucia is an alien world if there ever was one. On Kashyyyk at least, the trees and animals are all at least somewhat similar to those from less obscure planets. But there's nowhere in the galaxy quite like Felucia. The life forms there throw all the usual patterns out the window, leaving you with a jungle of giant fungi full of animals that you can see straight through. Felucia is not a destination for the faint of heart, and not only because it's weird, there's plenty of danger there too. Some of it conventional and some of it as bizarre as the planet itself. Like with Kashyyyk's Shadowlands, it feels weird just setting foot on Felucia. This time, it's not some inherent darkness or whatever though. Felucia's gravity is 75% of the galactic standard, which is strong enough to keep you from doing any crazy jumps, but just weak enough that you feel like something's off. This is probably a big part of why the planet's wildlife is so unusual. Weaker gravity means life forms can grow larger more easily. The other part probably has something to do with Felucia's son, Felix. Felix puts out a lot of ultraviolet light, which among other things can mess with DNA, causing mutations. That might be part of why Felucian wildlife is so peculiar, but it's also another danger for visitors, as excessive UV causes cancer in humans. Felucia's skies are typically at least partially overcast though, which makes that a bit less of a problem. Just play it safe and pack some extra sunscreen. Felucia is hot and humid all over, and there's pretty much only two environments across the whole planet: shallow oceans and fungal jungles. The oceans are choked with algae and spores, and presumably they've got their own assortment of native life forms, but it's the jungles that Felucia is known for. You see, most jungles across the galaxy are made of trees, but Felucia's aren't. The planet is covered with giant, tree-sized flora of various kinds, but none of them are actually trees, and many aren't even plants. That's the other unusual thing about Felucia. It's dominated by fungi. There are proper plants on Felucia, but they're much less prominent for the most part, opposite to how things work on most planets. The third thing that makes Felucia's wildlife unusual is how it's all translucent. From the big fungi to Felucia's animals, most of the creatures on the planet are see-through. It's an adaptation to protect them from the planet's harsh UV rays, supposedly. When the skies are clear, sunlight makes Felucia's jungles light up in a dazzling array of colors. It's a really pretty sight, if one best seen from the safe side of a transparasteel viewport. Most kinds of plant and fungus on Felucia don't have proper names. Scientists haven't even categorized half of what grows on that planet, and that's only taking into account the species we know of. The largest flora in the jungles are enormous fungi. Giant purple mushrooms, tall spine-looking growths, pitcher plant-like fungi, and enormous knotted amalgams predominate, while the undergrowth is dominated by spike and spore plants, as well as the healing herb, Nissalin. But this is hardly an exhaustive list, and there are also many creatures on Felucia that blur the line between plant, fungus, and animal. The Yerdua poison spitter is a good example, a semi-sentient, rooted creature that eats meat and spits poison at trespassers. Felucia's animals are every bit as weird as the plants and fungi. Flying mantas, Felucian rippers, and odd bird-like creatures rule the skies. Slime snipes live in the trees, and Felucian snails, slugs, and cat bunnies dominate the ground. Felucia's got plenty of bugs, such as the Felucian firefly and the parasitic cerulean droch. The most notable bug on Felucia is the giant Gelagrub, the largest species of bug in the galaxy. The adult form of the Gelagrub was an enormous beetle, but its larval stage was probably the least terrifying of all the living things on Felucia, despite being giant see-through grubs covered in slime. Gelagrub larvae are docile and make good beasts of burden, and they're also quite cute. Some of these species are harmless, others will attack you if they're hungry or you seem like an easy meal, but will otherwise leave you alone. But some of Felucia's wildlife are outright hostile. The cerulean droch and Yerdua poison spitter I mentioned earlier are good examples of this. However, the worst dangers on Felucia aren't the large predators, they're microscopic. All the fungi on Felucia clog up the air with spores, some of which are dangerous. The jungles are also teeming with all manner of exotic germs you likely have no immunity to, and Felucian flesh-eating diseases are no joke. You might also have heard of some more well-known predators that stalk the jungles of Felucia, such as the jungle rancor and the Acklay. Well, these creatures, as well as the docile Timus, are actually non-native, although they've firmly established themselves on Felucia by this point. They're not the only non-native creatures on the planet either. Most of the planet's population is composed of settlers. There are two main settler populations on Felucia. The less noteworthy one is the Felucians, who immigrated to Felucia from some other world and have made it their adopted homeworld. They're mostly peaceful farmers and they're friendly to outsiders. For the most part, they live in simple villages in the jungles, and they've been on Felucia for millennia. The Felucians are supposedly distant relatives of the Gossams, the other settler population on the planet, who were the first outsiders to discover Felucia back in the pre-Republic era. Thousands of years before the Republic, Gossam Karivas using primitive tumble drives found and colonized Felucia. They faced stiff resistance from the planet's wildlife, but they eventually succeeded in establishing settlements on the planet, and the Gossams have controlled Felucia ever since. There's about 8.5 million settlers on Felucia, most of them in the Gossam cities. Kuei Tiao is the capital. The other major ones are Niango, Jiaozi, and Hargao. All of these are controlled by the Commerce Guild, which pretty much owns the Gossam species and has its headquarters on Felucia. The guild nominally owns Felucia, and it's got a bunch of fortresses all over the planet, plus armies of battle droids out in the jungles. But they're only really trespassers, and they only control a few small parts of the planet. There are a fair few villages deep in the jungle that are home to renegades and enemies of the guild, havens for criminals and escaped workers alike. And if you go even deeper, there are far stranger and more dangerous settlements for you to find. The Felucians, despite their name, aren't indigenous to Felucia, but the planet does have one indigenous sentient species: the Jungle Felucians. The Jungle Felucians are low-tech and very insular, living in tribal, shamanistic communities very deep in the jungle. These guys are truly bizarre, as you'd expect from Felucia. They're bipedal amphibians with suction cup-like extremities. Their arms split at the elbows, giving them 4 forearms and an extra set of hands. And their faces, well, you really have to see them to get a good picture. But their most extraordinary attribute is something all Felucian creatures share: an intrinsic interconnection. See, I don't know how much you know about fungi, but even on ordinary planets, they're pretty weird. They've got an odd symbiotic relationship with plants that almost works like a sort of hive mind in some cases. But on Felucia, this is taken to the next level. All living things on the planet are interconnected. The whole place is like one giant living thing. It's not just the plants and fungi either, but the animals as well, and the jungle Felucians are no exception. I heard a Jedi say once that the jungle Felucians were innately force sensitive. And while I don't really go in for the whole force thing, the Felucians certainly have some kind of power to them. They're not the only ones either. One of the more elusive predators on Felucia is the Rakatan. They're bipedal but non-sentient, and they're very solitary, keeping to strictly defined patches of territory. They also supposedly hunt using the Force. I don't quite know how it works, but the Rakatan are able to mind trick other creatures to appear friendly, allowing the Rakatan to easily capture and kill them. There are also places on Felucia that seem shrouded in darkness, like the Shadowlands on Kashyyyk. The Rancor Graveyard is one such place, a spot deep in the jungles littered with the bones of jungle Rancors. Another is the Ancient Abyss, which the jungle Felucians apparently consider a sort of holy site. To the careless, it might just look like a pit with vines growing out of it, but the Ancient Abyss is actually the mouth of a huge sarlacc, the largest I've ever heard of. The jungle Felucians, if you can believe it, have a city built above its gullet, and they supposedly use the sarlacc as a sacrifice pit. Felucia is a crazy world. A pretty one, but a crazy one nonetheless. Honestly, you might want to stay away from it if at all possible. Having to deal with the Commerce Guild is bad enough, but there are 1,000 other ways to die on Felucia, and none of them are particularly pleasant. Welcome back. I had a feeling I'd be seeing you again. Here for some more tales of the obscure and unusual? Well, you're familiar with Kashyyyk, right? Everyone's at least heard of it. And the Wookiees have got to be one of the most famous species in the galaxy. If you ever have a run through the Mid-Rim, you're bound to dock in Roro or Kachiro at least once. It's a beautiful place. Beats the hell out of Tatooine, that's for sure. But it's got a dark side to it, like every place else. Maybe you've even heard stories about the Shadowlands, the darkest depths of Kashyyyk's planetary forest. Take it from someone who's been there. The stories don't even come close to capturing the eeriness of that place. Kashyyyk is one hell of a planet. It's a forest world, but that name doesn't really do it justice. The whole planet, except for a few oceans, is covered by the biggest forest you've ever seen. That forest is full of thousands of different kinds of Roshir trees, which are absolutely enormous. If you've been to or seen pictures of Kashiro, one of the Wookiees' coastal cities, then you're probably imagining the kinds of Roshirs that grow along the coast. Those are hundreds of meters tall, and they're tiny for Kashyyyk. The Roshirs of the deep forest, the ones you'll see if you're ever in Rukro, grow to several kilometers in height. The deep forest Wookiees divide their planet into 7 levels, with the 7th being the highest and the level they live on. That level represents the canopy, and it's plenty bright during the day. Most visitors to Kashyyyk, the smart ones at least, stay up there with the Wookiees, where it's safe. Apart from the occasional incursions of Mycals or Kinrath, the canopy of Kashyyyk's forest is one of the most beautiful places in the galaxy. The Wookiees are artists with wood, and their cities are as beautiful as the tangle of branches they're built in. During the day, shafts of sunlight break through the upper canopy to light the treetops, and at night, the Wookiee cities come to life with the light of thousands of homemade lamps. But we're not here to talk about the treetops. Each level of Kashyyyk's forest below the canopy is darker and more dangerous than the level above it. The forest is crammed with living creatures from top to bottom, but the lower you go, the more vicious they get. For a level or two below the canopy, the predators are mostly average-sized and kept in check by the Wookiees, and there's still sunlight to a degree. On the lower levels though, it gets hard to tell day from night, and the predators start getting particularly nasty. On the lowest level of the forest, enormous roots arch overhead and block out the last traces of light to make it down that far, making the place permanently dark. That's why the Wookiees call that part of the forest the Shadowlands. There's no place in the galaxy quite like the Shadowlands. There's enormous trees as far as the eye can see, their trunks stabbing up through the mist and out of sight far above. You can just barely make out the tangles of the lower branches, covered with leaves, moss, and vines. Closer still are the roots of the trees, which are as massive and tangled as the branches. The Roshir roots make the Shadowlands a maze, since many of them arch over or are only half buried in the ground, forming huge walls that can be hard to find a way around. And from top to bottom, those roots aren't just covered in moss and vines, but in spider webs. The cries of 1,000 beasts echo through the trees at all hours, and sometimes you can hear distant horns from Wookiee hunting parties. The actual forest floor is always shrouded in mist, and it's choked with corpses and debris. You could probably find some interesting things scavenging the bodies down there, but it's a death sentence to stay in one place in the Shadowlands for long, so I wouldn't suggest trying it. The Shadowlands are home to many, many predators capable of easily taking down a human being, and there are probably many more in the obscure parts of the forest still waiting to be discovered. We'd be here all week if I tried to list all of them, but there are 3 in particular that you should be wary of if you ever find yourself down in the Shadowlands. The first is the Rakatan. You've probably heard of those before. They're lizard mammals, and large enough for a Wookiee to ride one as a mount, with sharp teeth, horns, and claws. The Rakatan are masters of stealth, ferocious ambush hunters that use to prey on the Wookiees, or so the Wookiees say. They're not exclusive to the Shadowlands. They can use their claws to climb the trunks of the Roshir trees, though they're still very rare in the upper branches. But when the Wookiees hunt the Rakatan, which they do as part of several important rituals, they descend to the Shadowlands, where the beasts are the most common. The Wookiees see the Catan as their rivals. Their legends claim that the Catan were once the dominant species of Kashyyyk, and that being hunted by them was what gave the Wookiees the strength and inner fire they needed to overthrow the Catan and become the new dominant species. Someday, their elders claim, the roles will reverse once again, and the Catan will rule once more. The other two big predators in the Shadowlands are varieties of spider, the Viper Kinrath and the Wishok. Viper Kinrath look like the ordinary Kinrath that stalk Kashyyyk's treetops, as well as the caves of Tatooine and a few other worlds, but they're reddish in color, much tougher, and 10 times as dangerous. Their venom is incredibly potent, and they swarm in the Shadowlands, attacking interlopers with webs, pincers, and fangs, but even they pale in comparison to the Wishok, which you might know as web weavers. Wishoks are the biggest spiders you'll ever see, and they're really damn intelligent. They work in groups, can track you for over a kilometer, and are stealthy as hell. Most of their victims don't even see them coming until they pounce. And once a Wishok attacks, they only need a few moments to subdue their prey. Their webbing is thick and near impossible to escape, and their venom is some of the most potent in the galaxy. The Wishok is the most dangerous predator on Kashyyyk, apart from the Terentatek, that is, a few of which are known to have lived in the Shadowlands in the past. The Shadowlands are one of the most predator-infested places in the galaxy, but that's not the only reason why they're rightfully feared. It's hard to understand if you've never been there, but there's something wrong with the place itself. Just being there is creepy. It's because the Shadowlands aren't just literally dark, they feel dark. The Wookiees aren't immune to the effect either. They've mythologized the Shadowlands as a symbol of murder, corruption, and darkness, a kind of animal state given form. Some of their legends hint that there's something sinister down there, an ancient darkness more dangerous than any beast. And those legends are true. There's an ancient machine in the darkest depths of the Shadowlands, a computer far older than you could ever imagine. Everything in the immediate area has grown around it, as if the machine came before them. It doesn't look all that special, but if you see it in person, you know just by being near it that there's something wrong with it. Like the Shadowlands, it feels dark, but much more intensely. It's clearly something that's been forgotten for a long time, and you get the feeling that maybe it should have stayed that way. The only name I know for the device is the Builder Forge. The computer interface doesn't work anymore, at least not as far as anyone can tell, but the story goes that when it did, it claimed to have been a monument to an ancient empire, all that remains of its builder's ancient settlement on Kashyyyk. It's said that the computer's records indicate that the machine had been a terraforming device of some kind, placed on the planet to make it suitable for mass agriculture. The machine claimed to have experienced a malfunction tens of thousands of years ago, and it blamed said malfunction for the rapid growth and evolution of Kashyyyk's trees and predators. I don't know if that machine actually created Kashyyyk's forests, but I'm pretty sure about one thing. It probably created the Shadowlands. The Builder Forge is the source of the darkness that pervades the forest floor, the thing that inspires the bloodthirst of the Wishok and the Catan. That machine is tainted, that's for sure, and its taint has spread throughout the Shadowlands. Good to see you again. You interested in hearing about the dark side of one of the galaxy's prettiest planets? I thought so. Well, you've surely heard of Naboo before. If you're lucky enough to have been there, you know it's one of the most beautiful planets in the galaxy. It's got rolling plains, pleasant seas, beautiful cities, everything you could want out of the mid-rim. Even if you go off the beaten path, it's still a pretty nice place. The underwater Gungan cities are a true marvel, almost as incredible as Theed itself. But Naboo's got monsters as well. Big ones, too. You've got to dive really deep to find them. They lurk in the planet's porous core region, which is full of vast underwater tunnels. It's poorly explored, and it's home to some of the largest sea monsters in the galaxy. Naboo is a unique world. Most terrestrial planets have a solid inner core and a molten outer core made of a nickel-iron alloy, surrounded by a rocky mantle and planetary crust. Naboo's got the standard nickel-iron inner core, but its outer core is made of plasma, which gives the planet a bunch of unusual properties. Now and again, this plasma bubbles up towards the surface, carving huge tunnels through the mantle and crust. These tunnels are all flooded, and they crisscross the planet, forming the Naboo Abyss. The Gungans call them the underwater ways, and sometimes use them as undersea highways, but even they avoid the Abyss when they can. That's because this enormous underground ocean is home to some of the largest predators in the galaxy. Take the OP Sea Killer. This 20-meter monster is some sort of cross between a crustacean and a fish. It's got a long, heavily armored body, one set of pectoral fins, 3 pairs of legs for swimming, and the biggest mouth you'll ever see. The OP prefers to perch in one spot and try to lure prey in. It's got 2 long antennae above its eyes that act as lures, drawing particularly stupid fish towards whatever outcropping the OP's hiding behind. But the OP Sea Killer can also be an active hunter when it wants to be. Despite its unusual body plan, it's a damn good swimmer. Its swimming method is unusual, to say the least. The OP sucks water in through its massive mouth and then blasts it back out through pores under its armor plates, propelling it forward at a respectable speed. The OP can accelerate pretty quickly, allowing it to ambush prey easily. When it catches up to something it wants to eat, it spits out a long, prehensile tongue to draw the victim into its mouth, which is packed with 2 rows of very sharp teeth. Male OP sea killers can also use their mouths to carry fertilized eggs, which means they have to fast for 3 months until the young are born. The OP sea killer is one of the toughest and most aggressive predators on Naboo. Its hide is made of some sort of heavy-duty chitin, and blaster fire is totally useless against it. And even creatures large enough to bite through it have to be careful of the OP's teeth and tongue. But there's always a bigger fish, and even the OP sea killer has its rivals. The second largest predator on Naboo is the Colo clawfish, clocking in at 40 meters long. These beasts weigh 2,100 kilograms on average, and they look even more gnarly than the OP sea killer. These motherfrackers look like some sort of cross between a crocodile and an eel, with long, flat bodies and bony heads full of sharp teeth tipped with venom. They have 2 arm-like appendages that work as mandibles, tipped with sharp fangs that the Colo clawfish uses to shovel food into its mouth. These guys eat whatever they can get their hands on and can unhinge their jaws for particularly large meals. Since the Colo clawfish is the second largest creature on Naboo, this means it eats virtually everything that moves. Its stomach can expand to accommodate larger meals as well. Colo clawfish prefer the darkest parts of Naboo's depths, living in the narrower tunnel systems and abyssal trenches. They're lined with bioluminescent strips and glowing spines that help them hunt in these conditions, drawing in prey so that the Colo clawfish can rip them apart. Their secret weapon, though, is a powerful hydrosonic speech, which Colo clawfish use to stun prey before they pounce. They're one of the most lethal predators in the galaxy, so much so that a few have been taken off-world for study. This resulted in the creation of the Kaminoan saberjowl, a subspecies of the Colo clawfish that was created and accidentally released by Kaminoan cloners. The Colo clawfish is one of the only creatures fearsome enough to pose a threat to the OP sea killer, but that goes both ways. Though the Colo clawfish is twice as long as the OP is bulkier and still capable of preying on Colos now and again. The Colo clawfish, meanwhile, loves to eat the OP's eggs and young, often swallowing them whole while they're still alive. But this can be a mistake. OPC killer eggs have been known to hatch in the stomachs of their predators, and young OPs that get swallowed alive are capable of eating their way through a colo clawfish's stomach, leaving their would-be predator to suffer an agonizing death. All told though, the colo clawfish is a real beast, capable of subduing prey in a variety of highly effective ways. Even Gungan subs have been known to fall victim to these monsters. But both the colo clawfish and the OPC killer are dwarfed by Naboo's largest predator, which preys on them both. There is, after all, always a bigger fish. The largest creature on Naboo is the stuff of legends. The Sando aqua monster grows to an average length of 200 meters, and it weighs an average of 54,000 tons. It dwarfs every other living thing on the planet. Hell, it dwarfs virtually every living thing in the galaxy. But size alone isn't the only reason that the Sando aqua monster is so terrifying. It's also notable in that it looks out of place for an aquatic environment. It's actually a mammal, and it looks more like a giant undersea feline than anything that belongs down in the Naboo abyss. It's too familiar, as it were. Sando aqua monsters have enormous, bulky bodies with long tails, flat heads, and 4 limbs. Curiously, they seem only half adapted to underwater life. Unlike most undersea mammals, they don't have layers of fat or blubber for insulation, and they aren't very streamlined, making them slow swimmers. Their limbs have these odd half-claw, half-fin structures at the end, which I've heard make scientists believe that Sando aqua monsters have only just started to adapt to living underwater. These beasts use their back limbs for swimming and their front limbs to grab prey, which they funnel towards their vast mouths. Their heads sort of remind me of a Nexus, just with only one set of eyes. As you might expect, Sando aqua monsters need to eat a lot to be able to grow so large, and they prefer more massive creatures, such as the colo clawfish and the OPC killers, but they'll generally eat anything in their path. Even with these large meals though, Sando aqua monsters are generally lethargic, as activity takes a lot of energy for them. They spend up to 90% of their time just lying around on rocky shelves, waiting for something tasty to pass by, which makes them ever so slightly more productive than the average Republic senator. When a Sando aqua monster does spot something tasty, it lunges out and devours it, then goes back to its nap. Most Naboo consider the Sando aqua monster little more than a myth, as next to nobody's ever seen one, but the Gungans know better. Even they encounter these vast beasts only rarely, but they have enough experience to be afraid of them. Indeed, the Gungans believe the Sando aqua monsters to be mystical creatures, indisputably real, but deeply connected to a higher plane. They believe that Sando aqua monsters guard the lost underwater city of Osoros, the mythical home of the Gungan pantheon. I don't buy into that story, but if any creature in this galaxy was brought into being by some higher power or other, I think the giant underwater cats are a pretty safe bet. Ah, good to see a familiar face. Welcome to Korriban. This planet's got a hell of a lot of stories to tell. None of them pleasant. We'd be here for an hour even if I just gave you the short version. Maybe another time. Right now, I've got something special to show you. You see this box? This is what I came here for. I'm picking it up for some collector on Eriadu who's paid a fortune for it. There's a few dozen of these out in the galaxy, scattered all around, and they're ancient, more so than they look. This one's at least 30,000 years old. Ooh, don't try to open it. Trust me, that's the last thing you want to do with one of these. This isn't any old box. It's the symbol of an ancient empire's reign of terror, home to someone who should have died tens of thousands of years ago. What you're looking at, my friend, is a mind prison.
Attention, Sergeant on deck!
This box was found here, on Korriban, in one of the planet's most remote and ancient tombs, but mind prisons like it have been found all over the galaxy, all on planets that are notable for some reason or another. But most of them have been found on one planet in particular, out in the unknown regions. I've heard it called Lehon, but I have no idea whether or not that is its proper name. It's a pretty world, an ocean planet dotted with thousands of tropical islands, but it's also one of the more uncanny places in the galaxy. The works of civilizations past are littered all over the place. The islands are dotted with ancient ruins, from isolated temples and camps to vast ancient cities, which are now almost completely overgrown. And the whole planet is covered with space wrecks, from downed freighters to ancient Republic cruisers. But across the entire planet, there isn't a single sentient being remaining. It's an eerie world, a haunted world, and even though it looks nice and pleasant, the whole planet feels like ancient evil, long dead but still potent, the thousand atrocities of an ancient empire come home. Right now, the Republic rules the galaxy, and that's how it's been for as long as anyone remembers. But it didn't always, and the galaxy is littered with the ruins of another civilization of similar scale, one that ruled for 10,000 years before its collapse allowed for the rise of the Republic. This was an ancient empire that enslaved the entire galaxy, building monuments to its rulers that still stand today. I told you about one of them before. Remember the Builder Forge on Kashyyyk? The people who made that thing, remembered by species across the galaxy as the Builders, came from Lehon. But they didn't stay there. Archaeologists are still trying to piece together the full story of the Builders and their infinite empire, but by all accounts they were vicious and incredibly powerful. They enslaved entire species and exterminated others, terraformed planets, even brutalized each other, maintaining a rigid caste system within their own species. The legends of some people say that the Builders were cannibals who feasted on the bodies of their dead, and if that's true, it tracks with the violence they inflicted on the galaxy. Nothing could stop them. Not until they were hit by a plague, which devastated the Builders, destroyed their empire, and forced them back to their home world. Archaeologists say there was a civil war there, just a few centuries before the dawn of the Republic. A war that ended with the use of weapons of mass destruction, which wiped out nearly all that remained of the Builders. Those that survived died out long ago. The infinite empire of the Builders was built on strict hierarchies, and those at the top enforced them in many, many ways. There is no end to the kinds of exotic violence the infinite empire used to keep its subjects in line. The legends of some people say the Builders had an infinite fleet, unstoppable and all-consuming, which could cleanse whole planets of life. Individual offenders were met with every form of torture you could think of, plus many more that you probably couldn't even imagine. These punishments were sometimes inflicted on entire species that the Builders considered undesirable. And like the Republic today, the Infinite Empire also used prisons to maintain control. In the Republic, most offenses worth caring about come with some amount of jail time, but for the Builders, prison was one of the more extreme punishments. It was apparently usually reserved for members of their own species, as well as for some members of other species that the Builders wanted to preserve for study, but didn't want to deal with otherwise. As you can tell just by looking at this little box, the Builders' prisons were far removed from the ones we have in the Republic. It's much too small to fit a human in, or at least it might look that way. It doesn't look all that special either. It looks like an ancient cargo crate, and you might easily confuse it with some unremarkable ancient artifact from Lehon or any other world with history. From what I've heard, the places the Builders stored these things weren't anything special either. My client told me this one was dug out of some ordinary-looking cellar in some old temple, with nothing but shelves that once must have been full of these little boxes. It's only if you make the mistake of opening the box that you realize how these things work and comprehend the full extent of the builder's cruelty. The inside of the box is nothing but white light, which you see for only a moment before there's a sudden flash. An outside observer would see your body go limp immediately, and if they took your vitals, they'd probably think you were dead. When you open one of these boxes, it rips your consciousness straight out of your body and imprisons it inside. The ancient builders apparently used these mind prisons in a few different ways. In some cases, sentences in mind prisons were temporary, in which case they'd preserve the body of the condemned and download their mind back into it when their sentence was up. Whatever they used to re-download convicts back into their bodies is lost to history now though, which means all mind prisons work the same way now. They imprison convicts for eternity, something even the builders only inflicted on their worst criminals. For those types, the builders would destroy the bodies of the condemned after they were imprisoned, meaning that they could never be set free, no matter what happened. The world inside the box is stark white, an infinite expanse of emptiness as far as the eye can see. The only features within are a bed and a set of 4 stone pillars around it. No idea what the pillars are for or what's written on them, but they're there. Aside from those features, it's just the whiteness, eternal and unchanging. If there are other beings in the mind prison, sometimes you can hear their voices whispering from the void, and at other times, you can hear their screams. A few months of the whiteness is enough to drive anyone mad, but a few months is a blink of the eye for the condemned in these boxes. They get to endure the whiteness forever, never dying, never even aging, without hope of ever being released from their endless torment. Some of the mind prisons are empty, some aren't. Some of the occupied ones hold relatively new arrivals who were ensnared by the mind prison on accident, and some hold their original prisoners, builders who have been stuck in the whiteness for 30,000 years. This mind prison is one of those, one with an ancient builder inside. I don't know his name, nor does he. It's been so long that he has forgotten it. You might be wondering how I know all this about the inside. Well, that's because I know someone, an archaeologist I run shipments for, who got trapped in this one and escaped. As it turns out, these prisons aren't inescapable, but escape requires knowledge of how the technology works, which rules out anyone alive today, and it requires an empty body available for the imprisoned one to inhabit, which rules out the original prisoners whose bodies have long since turned to dust. That gives our friend inside the box only one way to escape. Someone else needs to open the box and get stuck inside, just like that acquaintance of mine. Apparently, even then, nobody can escape the mind prison unless the imprisoned one and the visitor both agree to allow it. The builder in this box challenged my friend to a game of riddles, with the winner allowed to leave the prison. Lucky for my archaeologist pal, she's better at riddles than an ancient warlord that was imprisoned for who knows how long, so she was the one who escaped. The next person to open this box might not be so lucky. I can't say I expected to see you all the way out here. Calchabol's pretty far afield. What the hell brings you all the way out here? Well, I suppose it doesn't matter. You're interested in hearing a local legend? A true one, at that? It's about a nearby nebula you might have seen on your star chart coming in. Now, Calchabol is as remote as it is, but there's a whole swath of wild space rimward of it, out in the Cathol sector out back. There's a whole tangle of lesser-known routes and settlements out there, and a handful of local interstellar civilizations. You've got the Pimbrellan League closest, then the Cathol Republic, and finally, the Kektoth Confederation. But past it all is this big, frackin' nebula, the densest you will ever see. It's called the Cathol Rift, and it's one of the weirdest places in the galaxy. Just getting there is an adventure, but if you actually manage to get inside, it might be more than even a hardened spacer can handle. The path to the Cathol Rift is complicated, and there's plenty of potential danger along it. From here, you'd want to head all the way down the Trition trade route until you reach the Markol Void. That's where the Cathol sector becomes the Cathol Outback. There's two routes through the Markol Void, one that leads to the Pimbrellan League worlds, and another that eventually leads to the Cathol Republic. From there, the route first goes to Ukablis, and then to Shatun. After Shatun, you'll want to head to the Narmalis system. There's a colony world out there, Danor, where you can rest for a while. Due to the quality of the routes, it's slow going just to get this far. Weeks of hyperspace travel at least. Past Danor, you'll finally reach the Cathol Rift. By the time you reach the Cathol Rift, you'll be on the very edge of the galaxy. There's nothing past the rift but void and a few straggler stars circling the galaxy on eccentric orbits. The rift itself is a massive wall of gas and dust, the densest nebula you'll ever set eyes on. It covers a huge swath of space, and it's a real pain to travel through. The only known hyperspace routes through the Cathol Rift cut through the center, but the course is winding, convoluted, and treacherous. It can take a month just to get to the other side. The usual dangers of traveling through nebula apply to the Cathol Rift, but the Rift also has some more unique challenges for travelers. Just being in the nebula causes hallucinations, for one thing. Especially hallucinations of spiders, for some reason. If you're skittish about arthropods, stay away from the Cathol Rift at all costs. Even if you're not, you might want to keep your distance anyway, and the hallucinations are just the start. It's what's hidden inside the rift that's really worth talking about. The scientists on Danor are pretty sure the Cathol Rift is artificial. Some say it was made by the Celestials in the times before the Republic, before the Builders even. The locals have a different story. They say that long ago, the Cathol Outback was the territory of the Old Ones, the original Cathol species, a highly advanced civilization with bizarre organic technology. They created whole species to serve them, and they traveled from system to system using launch gates, enormous organic platforms that opened portals into hyperspace. The story goes that thousands of years ago, a dark Jedi conquered the Cathol, and a Jedi Knight came in after them. There was a battle, and during it, one of the Cathol's launch gates overloaded and blew up. Supposedly, this tore a hole in hyperspace and fracked up the whole region of space, creating the Cathol Rift. Regardless of which story's true, the Cathol Rift is a spooky place, and there are a lot of secrets hidden within it. Some of them have yet to be properly discovered. If you've heard of the Ain't monks, their homeworld is supposed to be located somewhere inside the rift, though no one knows where. It's not on the known route through the nebula though, I can tell you that much. There are a few planets on that route though. The closest to the civilized galaxy is Khmer, a hellhole with ammonia oceans and a chlorine atmosphere, which isn't even worth looking at. Not far past it though, is the first alien construct you're likely to find in the rift, a sort of organic space station. No one knows who grew the thing or why, though the original Cathol are probably a safe bet. It's apparently some sort of space dock, but it's malfunctioned after having been abandoned for so long. Any ship that gets too close will be snatched up by the station's tentacles and dragged into one of its docking bays. The inside, supposedly, is a huge labyrinth. There's said to be an ancient artifact of alien origin deep within, but nobody knows for certain. Past the construct, there's a long stretch of empty space before you reach the blue swirl, a relatively calm region of the nebula with a bunch of blue stars in it. This region contains Ivara, the homeworld of the Ivarima, a species unlike any other. They're a hive mind of sorts, kind of like the Belars, if you're familiar with them. Individuals of the species are non-sentient, but the Ivarima can develop collective sentience when in groups. This hive mind is managed by a creature called the Majvara, which depends on the Ivarima servants for survival. Past Ivara is Demon's Gate, a volcanic planet close to the far end of the Cathol Rift. This is the most remote charted world in the nebula, and unless you're a biologist or a geologist, there's nothing worth landing on this planet for. Contrary to its name though, there's nothing terribly dark about Demon's Gate. The name is based on its appearance from orbit more than anything else. No, the real dark heart of the Cathol Rift, if you can find it, is Cathol itself. Cathol was ravaged by whatever cataclysm created the rift, and it's a shell of its former self nowadays. Its cities are crumbling ruins, devoid of life. The Cathol themselves are nowhere to be found, but the planet, ruined though it is crawling with other kinds of sentience. Most of these are artificial, having been created for specific purposes, and they're some of the most bizarre creatures you will ever lay eyes on. One of the more prominent is the Char-on-T, who were created by the original Cathol to serve as farmers. They live as slaves now, along with a slew of other more recently created species, which range from sentient worms and birds to amorphous slime creatures. Cathol only has one known species that doesn't seem to have been created artificially, and they're somehow the strangest of all, the fiery ones, beings of pure light that live in secluded parts of the planet. All of Cathol's creatures, except for the fiery ones, serve as a single being, the last construct of the ancient Cathol. As the story goes, when the cataclysm that formed the rift happened, the Cathol activated a contingency plan. They built an immense crystalline organ called the Life Well that could safely store their consciousnesses and life energies until the cataclysm was over, following which they could emerge and reclaim their home world. Before they downloaded themselves into the Life Well, they built an organic supercomputer to maintain it, ordered to wake them at the proper time. This being supposedly looks like a 15-meter-long centipede, and though its original name is unknown, it's known today as the Dark Strider. The Dark Strider protected the Life Well through the cataclysm, but after the danger passed, it decided to keep its creators in stasis. Instead, it claimed Cathol for its own, filling the planet with its own bizarre creations and enslaving the Char-on-T. It's ruled Cathol as a tyrant for thousands of years, and its servants have built a fortress around the Life Well where the original Cathol are supposedly trapped to this day. It's said that their life forces have created an energy field in the Cathol Rift that's similar to the Force, which the locals call the Tari. Some of the beings that live on or near the Cathol Rift have stories claiming that one day, those trapped in the Life Well will be freed, the Dark Strider will be destroyed, and the rift will be purged of its dark taint. Only time will tell if those stories will come true. Welcome to Coruscant. After Kel Shabol, it's a bit of a culture shock being here. The center of the galaxy, with the grandeur to match. But everyone knows Coruscant's grandeur's only skin deep. It's a gilded world, like so many of the galaxy's city planets. The upper levels are well-kept and home to the planet's wealthy, while the levels below are little more than slums. The deeper you go, the worse it gets. Considering that you've come all the way down to 1313 to meet me, I'm sure you know that already. But the slums are just the start of the dangers down here. There are even deeper reaches of Coruscant that are abandoned, uninhabitable to all but the most hardy of mutants, and even the comparatively tame slum levels have dark secrets. Everyone loves to rag on Coruscant, myself included, but the city itself is a real marvel when you get down to it. They say that Galactic City is nearly 100,000 years old, though most of it was built relatively recently, during the Age of the Republic. It's completely consumed the planet in a way that no other planet city has. Hell, even the name Coruscant comes from how the city looks from orbit. I've no clue what the planet's original name was, and not even archaeologists know much about what Coruscant was like before the city. Everything this planet used to be disappeared long ago. Nowadays, pretty much everything about Coruscant is artificial. Originally, it was a rather chilly place, but nowadays, it's got orbital mirrors to make it warmer. Coruscant's atmosphere is constantly filtered and stabilized by atmospheric scrubbers, without which the planet would be uninhabitable due to pollution and all the sentience sucking up oxygen. Coruscant's got a few small seas, but they're artificial too. The only parts of the planet you can really consider natural are the handful of mountain peaks accessible from Galactic City and the planet's polar ice caps, which are dotted with irrigation stations that melt fresh water from the ice and pipe it all over Coruscant. The infrastructure required to keep Galactic City running is mind-bogglingly complex. I mean, there are at least 3 trillion people here, and all of them need to be fed, watered, and provided with breathable air. It doesn't help that there's a boatload of exotic non-humans with unique requirements living here. Some breathe methane, some breathe ammonia, some breathe cyanogen gas. And some apartment buildings have to find ways to house all of them at once, next door to your average oxygen-nitrogen breather. And the basics are just the start. Most sentients are going to want electricity, holonet access, waste disposal, the works. The infrastructure needed to support all runs through the Galactic City, and the lower you go, the more of it there is. I've heard that the ancient Coruscanti needed the help of the Gree to make it all work, and I'd believe it. But once you're done gawking at the engineering masterpiece Coruscant is, the thing that stands out the most is the social stratification. The wealthy live in gleaming skyscrapers on the surface, on the uppermost of Coruscant's 5,000-something levels. The poor live down here, where the sun never shines and danger is always just around the corner. Many generations of Coruscanti have lived and died in the underworld without ever seeing the sun. It's depressing, but it's true. All the light down here is artificial. Across most of the underworld, it's dim and unchanging, a permanent twilight that looks the same in the middle of the night as it does in the middle of the day. There's natural weather down here though, believe it or not. Moisture and air that get trapped down here create a microclimate that's exclusive to the underworld, shaped by the layout of the city blocks and traffic canyons. As a result, the underworld has 3 distinct climate layers, and it gets its own unique wind patterns and rainstorms. The Coruscant underworld's got plenty of non-sentient fauna too. All of Coruscant's original indigenous species went extinct long ago, except for the Thransil, the hawkbat, and, depending on who you ask, possibly humans as well. The rest have been replaced by a diverse array of vermin from across the galaxy, many of which have adapted all too well to living in Galactic City. You've got conduit worms, shadow barnacles, hive rats, granite slugs, duracrete slugs, and many, many more unpleasant creatures to reckon with down here. The conduit worms are the worst. They feed on electricity and live in the conduits that run through Galactic City, but when there's a blackout and they can't feed in the ordinary way, they send out feelers towards the nearest electrical source. More often than not, the nearest electrical source is a brain, and every time there's a blackout, a bunch of underworld dwellers turn up dead with conduit worm feelers going through their ears. The highest levels of the underworld are the mid-2000s, and they stretch down almost to level 1000, past which Coruscant gets completely uninhabitable. The underworld levels aren't accessible on every part of Coruscant. The skyscrapers of the wealthy need solid foundations after all, and as a result, the lower levels are filled in some places, or packed with huge machines that make the surrounding areas unlivable. While the upper levels are a shell over the planet, the actual inhabited and accessible parts of the lower levels are more of a spider web, an unnavigable labyrinth of streets and alleys winding their way across the planet. Coruscant Underworld is divided into a slew of districts, most of them unremarkable and lawless. There's law enforcement down here, but they're only a formality across most of the underworld, which is instead ruled by gangs or vigilantes. That makes the underworld a favorite haunt of out-of-work mercenaries, career criminals, and other people who like to kill for fun, so watch yourself while you're down here. But as on any planet, the bulk of the criminals down here aren't in it for pleasure. Poverty makes people desperate, and in a place like this, can you really blame people for resorting to extraordinary measures just to get by? Now, all of that's not to say that the entire Coruscant Underworld is an irredeemable hellhole where everyone's out to kill you. Most of the people here are normal folks just trying to scrape by. And there's valid reasons to visit the Underworld too, apart from meeting some old smuggler in a seedy cantina. If you've got business with the Hutts or Black Sun, this is one of the best places to arrange it. And if it's entertainment you seek, it's no secret that the Underworld is much more lively than Coruscant's surface. There's all sorts of fun down here, if you know where to look. All the best cantinas in Coruscant are in the Underworld, that's for sure, with the notable exception of Dex's Diner. The really dangerous parts of Coruscant aren't actually the slums. They're the levels that are even deeper. The most distant reaches of the Coruscant Underworld are completely abandoned and have been for thousands of years. There are old munitions factories down here that haven't seen use since the time of the Pious Dea, and below that is where things get really sketchy. The bottom 50 levels of Coruscant are straight up inaccessible, and the bottom 1,000 are pretty much uninhabitable. Between level 50 and level 1,000, there are hundreds of levels of Old City that are packed completely with trash from the city above. These levels are invariably contaminated with toxins, and below level 1,000, the air steadily becomes unbreathable as the lowermost levels are beyond the reach of the planet's atmospheric scrubbers. The bottom of Coruscant is a literal cesspit, a toxic abyss that in the very distant past was once the apex of the greatest city in the galaxy. But above the deepest depths of the cesspit and below the bottom of the underworld, there's a few levels of Undercity that ride the line between inhabitable and uninhabitable. These levels are the domain of mutants, the most wretched of the wretched, the forsaken descendants of Coruscant's worst off. Millennia and the toxic underbelly of Galactic City have mutated these beings into abominations that feast on any who wander into their domain. Their levels have been sealed off by the Coruscanti authorities, but there are still ways down here and there, as well as ways up for mutants eager for a meal. Coruscant's mutants tend to be similar to the kinds of creatures that dwell in caves on other planets. The most normal of these mutants are the corridor ghouls, pale, eyeless dogs that hunt via echolocation. The corridor ghouls, as well as a bunch of unnamed species with which they share their home, are non-sentient, but other mutant species aren't. The Coruscanti ogres are semi-sentient and vaguely humanoid, and whether or not they count as a singular species is a matter of debate. No two Coruscanti ogres are alike. These things live in the most vile and irradiated parts of the city, in sewers and old reactor stations, and they've been mutated beyond recognition. Some are capable of speech, but the extent to which they're genuinely intelligent is debated. Perhaps the most chilling of the Coruscanti mutants, though, are the Chthons. These beings are all too recognizable. Their ancestors were clearly human. But the Chthons have degenerated over the millennia, and nowadays they look like walking corpses. Their skin is pale and ragged, and though they have eyes, they're buried under a layer of skin. If you get close enough to a Chthon, you can see their eyes darting back and forth underneath this skin. But what's really uncanny about them is that they're still sentient. Barely so, but sentient nonetheless. They have a civilization of sorts down there, and they're still intelligent enough to build traps for trespassers. Or at least, that's what I've heard. anyone who has a run-in with the Chthons is unlikely to escape. They're the second most dangerous monsters on Coruscant, after the ones that live in the skyscrapers on the surface, that is. I knew you'd be back. Eager for a couple of stories about the unknown regions before you put Coruscant behind you? Well, you're in luck. The unknown regions are the galaxy's biggest mystery, at least as most people see it. A full third of the galaxy, more or less, almost completely cut off from us due to hyperspace anomalies. Republic explorers have tried to push into it for tens of thousands of years, without much luck. That's not to say the unknown regions are completely unknown, though. There's a few routes between the unknown regions and Republic space, though they're obscure and hard to navigate. It's not enough for the Republic to move in and start establishing settlements out there, but it means that, now and again, scraps of information about what's out there trickle through to the rest of the galaxy. Not all of it's pleasant, either. We've already talked about the key leaks and the Nal, but they really were just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to the unknown regions. I've got 3 more stories about the dangers lurking out there to share with you today, starting with one of the relatively ordinary threats the unknown regions have to offer. You might have heard of the cheese before. Come to think of it, I might have mentioned them to you a while back. The cheese are probably the most well-known unknown region species, but that's not really saying much. Contact with them is exceedingly rare, and they have a closed border policy that they make few exceptions to. Their government, the Cheese Ascendancy, is supposed to be the closest equivalent to the Republic the unknown regions have. But despite that, the Cheese are generally unwilling to interact with the Republic or its citizens. The rare exceptions mostly come when they have a common enemy with the outsiders, and more often than not, that enemy is the Vagari Empire. The Vagari are humanoid-ish. They're shorter than you or I, with big hands, wide eyes, and 2 mouths. They're somewhat primitive, but they're good at figuring out stolen technology, so they've taken to the stars and become a spacefaring civilization. No one I've spoke to knows where they come from, apart from somewhere out in the unknown regions, but it doesn't really matter because the Vagari are nomadic. They wander from system to system, plundering and conquering, making use of whatever technology they can find. By all accounts, the Vagari are brutal. I've heard they believe that their gods created them so that they might have superior beings to worship, and even if they don't have their heads up their arse that far, they certainly act like they do. They have no compassion whatsoever, and they see members of other species as property, enslaving any they capture. The Vagari apparently see the compassion of other beings as a weakness, and in combat, they do their best to exploit it. Their warships are covered in zero-grav bubbles, each containing a slave, and when they board ships, they herd crowds of slaves before them. In both cases, these slaves are used as living shields, meant to make the enemy hesitate to shoot. These bastards travel in a fleet of at least a few hundred ships, most of them stolen from other peoples. Their attacks tend to be random and without warning, and the Vagari aren't picky about their targets. They've attacked a handful of worlds on the edge of Republic space, and they've even fracked with the cheese from time to time. That's fortunate for us, because it means that the cheese have spent the past few years giving the Vagari a pounding. Thanks to them, the Vagari Empire is a much smaller threat to us than it otherwise might have been. But the Vagari aren't the only brutal conquerors waiting out in the unknown regions. One of the worst threats out there is much more obscure, and fortunately, much more remote. The Searook. These guys are Saurines from a remote star cluster in the far southwest of the unknown regions, as far as you could possibly get from galactic civilization. They're the rulers of the Suruvi Imperium, a small network of conquered planets around their homeworld, a remote jungle world. I've heard it called Luek, but I have no idea whether or not that is its proper name. Anyway, if the stories told about them are true, the Searook are every bit as brutal as the Vagari. They've got a caste system based on skin color, and they see members of all other species as inferior. Stop me if you've heard that before. They are religious zealots that believe that everything belongs to them by right of their superiority, including members of other species. And much like the Vagari, they enslave all the outsiders they can. But the worst part is what the Searook supposedly do to their captives, which makes them somehow even worse than the Vagari. Unlike the Vagari, the Searook develop most of their technology on their own, and some of it's completely alien to what we have in the Republic. The most unique and horrifying innovation they've made is what they call entekment. As the story goes, the Searook hook their captives up to rigs that suck away their life force, which the Searook use to power their technology. The entekment process is supposed to be uniquely agonizing, and beings more superstitious than I have claimed that the victim's soul is enteked along with their life force, trapping them as literal ghosts in the machine. It's a fate worse than death, and the whole Seruvi Imperium supposedly runs on it. Fortunately for us, the Seruvi Imperium isn't as expansionist as the Vagari Empire. The most common explanation I've heard for this is that the Searook believe that they only get access to the afterlife if they die on their home world or a planet that's been properly consecrated by their priests. If they die in space or on an unconsecrated world, their souls are left to wander oblivion in eternal torment. That puts a limit on the expansion of the Imperium. Conquering new worlds involves a lot of death, and no Searu is going to want to risk eternal damnation to take a new planet unless they're really desperate. They have slave species they can still use to conquer, but their beliefs have made them hesitant to expand regardless. But from what I hear, that might be about to change. Word is that the Searook are running out of resources at home, so they're starting to expand more than ever before. And before long, they might even come knocking on the Republic's door. And then, we are all in trouble. Now, the Vagari and the Searook are pretty horrific and, dare I say, evil in their own right. But they're an ordinary kind of evil, just another group of vicious conquerors with a god complex. The last story I have for you today is different. The subject of it isn't as obscure as the Searook or even the Vagari. If you paid attention in history class, you might have heard of it before. But the history texts don't do justice to one of the galaxy's darkest secrets. One of the more reliable routes into the unknown regions actually starts here, at Coruscant. It takes you down the Metelios trade route to the Kornact cluster, and from there it winds off into the darkness, to the far side of the galactic core. It empties out in a region called the Tempered Wastes, a stellar, poor region due west of the core. At the heart of this void is a lonely little system with a small ocean world that I've talked to you about before when I showed you the Mine Prison. Lehon is the only name for it I know. You'll remember that this planet was the homeworld of the Builders, the architects of an ancient empire that enslaved the galaxy in the time before the Republic. From this one lonely rock, the Builders expanded across the stars, forging an infinite empire that lasted 10,000 years. But they didn't do it alone. Lehon's sun is orbited closely by a huge debris field, which is all that remains of the Builders' greatest creation. Once, it was the glory of the Builders, the apex of their infinite empire, a tool of unstoppable conquest. Its name was the Star Forge. According to Republic records, the Star Forge was an enormous space station built in low orbit above the system's star. When it was active, the station consumed stellar material, constantly sucking in vast plumes of energy from the star and using it to fuel its internal factories. The Star Forge contained space docks, droid factories, fabrication facilities for arms and armor, and so much more. It took raw stellar material and made fleets and armies out of it. But most amazingly, it could do all of this pretty much on its own. The Star Forge was entirely automated, and it was made with some kind of special nanotechnology that allowed it to repair and maintain itself. All the Builders needed to give the Star Forge for it to function was a controller. Supposedly all of this worked through the Force. The Star Forge could only be controlled by one who was sufficiently strong in the Force, and the Force apparently powered the whole station, making its incredible production capabilities possible. The Star Forge was what allowed the Builders to rule the galaxy. It was constantly churning out more ships, more droids, and more guns than the Builders' enemies could ever hope to destroy, an infinite armada with which the Builders hoped to rule all the universe. The Starforge helped the Builders create the Infinite Empire, and fortunately for the galaxy, it also helped destroy it. Because the Starforge wasn't just a space station, it wasn't a tool, it had a will of its own. Not the will of some AI, but that of a living thing. The Starforge was alive, and it hungered. It fed on the conflict its capabilities inspired, and it fed on its controllers too. Records from one of the old Sith empires claim that would-be controllers who were too weak to master the Starforge were consumed by it. Their life energies ripped from their bodies by the machine. Even those with the strength to serve as controllers were slowly fed on by the Starforge, and the Starforge warped their personalities, amplifying their darker aspects and making them more aggressive, more likely to use its capabilities for violence and conquest. The Infinite Empire ultimately collapsed due to a plague that devastated the Builders, but even before that, it's said that their empire had been in decline for centuries, and some sources claim the Starforge was the cause. It brought out the worst in the Builders, making them more violent, more eager to conquer, until they started to turn on themselves. After the plague forced them back to Lehon, the Builders were consumed by civil war, which ended with the release of weapons of mass destruction. Just as the Starforge had built the Infinite Empire, it destroyed it as well. But the Starforge survived the end of the Infinite Empire. 20,000 years later, it was discovered by the Sith, who used it to build their own infinite fleet for one of their wars with the Republic. In the end, the Republic tracked the Sith back to Lehon and destroyed the Starforge in a great battle, blowing up its orbital stabilizers so that it fell into the sun. The threat of the Starforge was ended, for a time. I've been to the Lehon system, you know. I've flown through that debris field, and the Starforge is still there. Not the station itself, but the presence. That hunger. You can feel it. I don't know what the Builders did to create that thing, and I don't really want to know. But I'll tell you this. They made something that was never meant to exist. There are dark things in the galaxy, secrets that make the stars dim, just a bit. Things that are never supposed to be found by sentient beings. The Starforge was one of those things. Is one of those things. When you fly through that debris field and feel the lingering hunger, that appetite, the only thing you can really do is look through a viewport and see the trillion pieces of space junk the Republic turned the Starforge into, careening around haplessly. It's comforting, until you see two pieces collide together and stick. This close to the sun, this shouldn't be possible by the force of gravity alone. And it makes you think about the stories that say the Builders built the Starforge with self-repairing technology. The Starforge is still out there. It will take tens of thousands of years for it to put itself back together, but make no mistake, my friend, it will do so eventually. And when it does, we can only hope that its hunger won't consume us all. Back again? Well, I can't say I'm surprised. I've got some more tales of the strange and dangerous for you today. Now, everyone's got their favorite ghost ship story. There's a lot of liars out there who'll tell you they've seen one too. For the most part, ghost ships are just tall tales, my friend. But there are some stories that have a basis in reality. The galaxy's a strange place, and you're bound to find all manner of strange things in it if you search long enough. I've got 3 stories of ghost ships to share with you today, stories that have a basis in reality. The first one's not about a ghost ship per se, but more about a collection of ghost ships and similar phenomena. It's called the Drayton Triangle, and it's pretty well known. But there's so much BS about it floating around that it can get hard to separate fact from fiction, and there is some truth to the story. The Drayton Nebula, as you may know, is out in wild space on the edges of the Dantus sector, pretty far from civilization. Like a lot of nebula, it's dense and a pain in the arse to navigate. Deep within it are a scattering of noteworthy systems which contain 3 planets of special significance. There's Drayton, of course, a desert world that shares its name with the nebula. There's the swamp planet Imdar, somewhat close by, and then there's the crown jewel of the Drayton Nebula, Aten II, one of the galaxy's only known sources of stygium crystals, which is pretty much the only reason anyone tries to navigate the nebula. Stygium is one of the most valuable resources in the galaxy due to its use in cloaking devices. Now, there are a lot of ways to cloak a ship. The simplest is by just powering down all systems so that you look like a chunk of debris on most sensors. Some ships have dedicated signal jammers to maintain the same effect without powering down, but these methods still leave you vulnerable to the Mark I eyeball, so anyone serious about hiding their ship will get a genuine cloaking device, which renders the ship invisible to the naked eye as well as to sensors. Most cloaking devices are imperfect at best, using holograms or blending fields to hide ships from specific angles. But the best cloaking devices, the only ones that make ships properly invisible, use stygium crystals. This makes Aten II a very important planet. Or it did, back before the planet's mines ran dry. But getting to Aten II requires going through the Drayton Nebula, which is easier said than done, and not just because of the ordinary dangers of navigating nebulae. Aten II, Drayton, and Imdar are said to make up the Drayton Triangle, a patch of space where reality is off and strange things happen. Ships disappear passing through the region all the time, and sightings of ghost ships there are just as common. Some of these ghost ships have been known to fire on travelers, attempting to add them to the ranks of those lost in the Drayton Triangle before disappearing suddenly. Of course, with Aten II in such close proximity, it's worth considering whether these are actual ghosts or just ordinary ships with cloaking devices. But even if it hasn't actually haunted, the Drayton Nebula's a dangerous place. Speaking of danger, any spacer worth their spice will tell you that nothing's more dangerous than picking a fight with the Bureau of Ships and Services. And that's no exaggeration. There's a whole fleet of ghost ships out there to attest to that. If you paid attention in history class, you just might remember the Pius Dea. You know, the crazy warmongering cult that ruled the Republic for 1,000 years. They subjected the whole galaxy to all sorts of horrors, from anti-alien bigotry and corrupt theocracy to vicious crusades and inquisitions. During their reign of terror, the most well-known symbols of the Pius Dea were the cathedral ships, the great black battleships their crusaders used to ravage the Rim. They were some of the most sinister ships you'd ever set eyes on, by all accounts, bristling with guns, jagged plating, and the spires of ad hoc cathedrals. They terrorized the galaxy for 1,000 years before the Pius Dea were finally brought down. The defeat of the Pius Dea was a group effort. The Jedi masterminded the whole thing, and Kamas and Alsakan both played big roles as well. But one of the most important conspirators was the Bureau of Ships and Services, which seeded the Navi computers of the entire Pius Dea fleet with rogue coordinates. One day, every cathedral ship in the galaxy was forced into hyperspace, sent off to the middle of nowhere, following which the Bureau remotely disabled their hyperdrives. The Crusaders aboard died slow, lonely deaths out in the middle of nowhere, their warships crawling through real space towards stars they would never reach. With history that old, it can be hard to tell what's reality and what's myth, but this story is at least mostly true. And we know because smugglers on lesser-known routes run into cathedral ships now and again, drifting aimlessly through space. Their reactors went cold long ago, but in space, anything with momentum will travel forever unless actively stopped, so they continue on their journeys, hollow husks without purpose. Some of them still carry the remains of their former crews, who starved to death over 10,000 years ago. Maybe they still have loot from conquered worlds sitting in their cargo holds, but you couldn't pay me to board one of those things to get it, that's for sure. If you ask me, the cathedral ships are as real as ghosts get. They're monsters from a bygone age, dead but still haunting the stars, just waiting for some smuggler to find them. The only consolation is that they're long dead. A cathedral ship won't hurt you unless you slam into it. But some ghost ships are much more unquiet. This last ghost ship is another one from the history books, and Thankfully, it was destroyed thousands of years ago. But based on what we know from the records of the old Sith Wars, in its time, it was the most terrifying ghost ship you could possibly encounter, and its name was the Ravager. The Ravager was originally a Republic Centurion-class battlecruiser made for the Mandalorian Wars. It was one of the largest warships of its time, a flagship of the Republic fleet. But it was felled by the Mandalorians in the last battle of the war, crippled by their last assault above Malachor 5. But the Ravager came back from the dead, and in the years after the Mandalorian Wars, it wandered the space lanes, hunting for prey. Eyewitness accounts from the Battle of Telos 4 suggest that the Ravager shouldn't have even been space-worthy. It was covered in wounds inflicted by Mandalorian guns, vast tears in its hull that left the ship's interior open to space. The ship's components were unstable, and bolts of electricity occasionally shot between the gaps in the hull, looking like lightning welling up from the guts of the ship. The interior was in a similarly poor state. The Ravager's decks were all in extensive states of disrepair, their walls charred and rusted. Barracks, control rooms, and missile bays all lay empty, their computers non-functional and covered in a thick layer of dust. The ship's lighting, where it still worked, had faded to a sickly yellow-orange. Most of the ship was empty. But not all of it. Because the Ravager wasn't just a ghost ship, it had a whole ghost crew. A horde of half-living zombie slaves, their once human features shriveled, pale and lifeless, still wearing tattered old uniforms of the Sith Empire. They were under the complete control of the Master of the Ravager, a Dark Lord of the Sith who, the records claim, held the ship together through sheer force of will, preventing the crippled vessel from succumbing to the damage it had sustained, much as he did for the crew. The Jedi say that this was no ordinary Sith Lord, but a hole in the universe, more an entity than a man, a lord of hunger, and their records say his name was Nihilus. The Ravager roamed the fringes of the galaxy at his command, hunting Jedi. In that era, the Jedi were coming close to extinction, and this ship was the reason why. Wherever the Jedi gathered, the Ravager would follow, and its master would destroy them, along with all who dared shelter them. The Ravager left a string of dead planets in its wake, worlds entirely bereft of life, from sentient beings down to the microscopic level. Qatar, a colony world in the Mid-Rim, was one such destroyed planet. Telos 4 was almost another, but it was saved by the Jedi, who slew the Lord of Hunger and blew his ghost ship to smithereens. The Ravager is long gone. The Sith are too, or so the Jedi say. But they weren't the only ones capable of these sorts of horrific, impossible things, and there's no telling when the next Ravager will arise to spite the world of the living. I thought I'd see you here. Anyone traveling the galaxy is bound to dock on Nar Shaddaa at least once. You want to watch yourself while you're here, though. Nar Shaddaa isn't the galaxy's most infinite shadow port for nothing. This moon's practically thrumming with activity. It's got 85 billion people scattered across it, spread from the highest skyscrapers to the darkest depths of the vertical city. Nar Shaddaa is like a Coruscant in that it's not just completely covered by urban zones, but that city districts are stacked on top of each other in hundreds of levels. But Nar Shaddaa's no Coruscant. A lot of Coruscant is nice, or at least decent. You only have to watch yourself if you go down into the underworld. But Nar Shaddaa is all underworld. It's one big, lawless, polluted slum. The poisoned commercial heart of Hutt space. And if you're going to spend any time at all here, you'd better know what you're getting into. As I'm sure you noticed on your way down, Nar Shaddaa is one of the most chaotic places in the galaxy. There's not much in the way of central government here. The Hutts own the moon, but they ignore most of it, leaving the people of Nar Shaddaa to their own devices. As a result, Nar Shadar's chaotic from top to bottom. The space lanes above are mostly unregulated and are a notorious mess. Many landing platforms or docks are abandoned or only unofficially managed, and every single sector is packed full of people, visitors, and locals alike. For that reason, Nar Shaddaa is one of the best places in the galaxy to get lost and lay low for a while. It's virtually impossible to find anyone on the moon's surface. People go to Nar Shaddaa to reinvent themselves all the time, taking up new names and identities to lose pursuers or put their past behind them. You can even hide out in the space lanes. Numerous crime lords have run their operations from spacecraft in orbit of Nar Shaddaa, using basic cloaking devices to mask their sensor outputs while they weave through the traffic. The city itself is a mess as well. The lack of regulation means that there's pretty much no zoning or central urban planning. The entire moon is a three-dimensional maze, thoroughly polluted and run down. You've got grand plazas surrounded by labyrinths of narrow alleys, towering skyscrapers, and kilometers-deep urban canyons, housing districts and cantinas right next door to industrial plants. Some places are designed confusingly on purpose, and in the most crime-ridden parts of Nar Shaddaa, some streets are intentionally mislabeled to lure off-worlders into traps. The verticality of Nar Shaddaa makes this worse. Unlike on Coruscant, the city levels on Nar Shaddaa are thoroughly interconnected. Instead of being divided into level-based neighborhoods, Nar Shaddaa is divided into sectors that cover swaths of the moon, with all the levels in a sector being more or less the same. The lower you go, the hotter and more polluted it is, but the highest levels are just as poor as the lowest ones, for the most part. A lot of Nar Shaddaa is industrial in nature, but Nar Shaddaa is most well known for its many urban zones. 85 billion people is a lot for such a small moon, and on top of that, Nar Shaddaa's population is one of the most diverse in the galaxy, with virtually every sentient species represented here. And unlike on nearly every other city planet in the galaxy, humans are a minority on Nar Shaddaa, if a decently large one. Most species on Nar Shaddaa have their own diaspora communities here, the largest of which have their own districts. These districts can vary pretty wildly in terms of wealth and status. While most of Nar Shaddaa is poor and run down, some parts are poorer than others. There are a few well-off districts that are decently nice to live in, though these are still full of crime. The Corellian sector is the most well-known of these. The neighboring Duros sector is a close second. Back during the Sith Wars, the Duros sector was poor as hell, populated mostly by refugees, but for the past few centuries, the Trade Federation's poured a lot of money into it, and it's become one of the better neighborhoods since. There's also New Vertica, which, after a rebellion a few centuries ago, is formally independent of Hutt rule, though they pay regular tribute to Nal Hutta to stay that way. Some city sectors are even poorer and more run down than most of the moon. Kohen Tota is one of the more well-known ones, but perhaps the poorest of all is the refugee sector, located on the far side of the moon. The refugee sector is a filthy ruin, full of the stench of decay and desperate living, and as you might guess from the name, it's full of refugees. You see, whenever there's a war in the galaxy and people get displaced, a lot of them always end up on Nar Shaddaa. There's a few reasons for that. A lot of space lanes lead here, so it's easy to get to, and since it's in Hutt space, it's generally isolated from whatever conflict is making people flee. Some refugees come to Nar Shaddaa hoping for a better life, only to wind up herded into the refugee sector, from which there's pretty much no escape. There, people live in shipping containers or out in the streets in an ancient, abandoned port district, most of them just barely scraping by. The neighboring districts maintain tight borders to keep the refugees penned in, and the Hutts and the other criminal factions regularly harass the refugees, taking them as slaves or coercing them into doing manual labor for a pittance. Believe it or not, the sector actually used to be a lot worse than it is today. If you know where to look, there are even hidden gems in the refugee sector. Legitimate industries and businesses run by the descendants of former refugees that achieved some measure of success. The refugees have their own community support networks as well, which keeps people from starving, but apart from the refugees themselves, the only people in the sector are off-worlders, trying to hide by posing as refugees, or the hirelings of the local crime lords. It's not a pleasant place, to say the least. But Nar Shaddaa wasn't always this way. Nar Shaddaa, as you surely know, is the moon of Nal Hutta, the Hutt's capital and adopted homeworld. They relocated to that bloated swamp 15,000 years ago, after their original homeworld was destroyed in a cataclysm. Nal Hutta, which was called Evakar then, had its own indigenous sentience, the Evakai, but the Hutt took their land and relocated them here, to the planet's largest moon. They put the Evakai to work, turning this moon into a massive city world to rival Coruscant, and when the city was complete, they drove the Evakai into the Undercity, where they died out long ago. For thousands of years, Nar Shaddaa was a mostly legitimate trading port. Back then, it was the end point of the Utmian Pabal, which used to be the most used hyperspace route between the Republic and Hutt space, and this meant that Nar Shaddaa grew pretty rich off trade with the Republic. Nar Shaddaa was the Hutt's big showplace, their public capital, while Nal Hutta was more exclusive, reserved for the Hutts and their guests. But about 4,000 years ago, the Utmian Pabal was severed by the Kyr supernova, and things changed for Nar Shaddaa. Legitimate traders heading into Hutt space wound up going to other ports, and Nar Shaddaa rapidly decayed. Within just a few decades, it had settled into a new role as the galaxy's premier shadow port, the Smuggler's moon. The Utmian Pabal's since been re-established, but the change has been permanent, since no legitimate trader wants to do business here anymore. So, Nar Shaddaa remains, and likely will forever remain, the galaxy's most wretched hive of scum and villainy. But there's more to Nar Shaddaa than crime. Spacers don't stop here every time they're in Hutt space just to get mugged. It's a well-known fact that Nar Shaddaa has some of the best entertainment, legal and otherwise, in the entire galaxy. Every sector on the moon has at least a few popular cantinas, casinos and/or brothels. Even the refugee sector's got a swoop track and a full-fledged entertainment promenade with a cantina and a Pazak den. 3 of Nar Shaddaa's cantinas, the Burning Deck, the Slag Pit and the Meltdown Cafe, are especially popular with bounty hunters. Other popular establishments include the Orange Lady, the Rimmer's Rest, the Star Cluster Casino, and Club Vertica Casino. Not to mention that Nar Shaddaa has entire entertainment districts. The most wealthy sector of the moon is the Promenade, located on Nar Shaddaa's near side. This district is the Hutt's big showplace, a vibrant commercial sector that, unlike the rest of the moon, is kept mostly safe by Hutt enforcers. There's also the much seedier and much more raunchy Red Light sector. Red sector isn't a dedicated entertainment district, and parts of it are slums, but the sector is notoriously packed full of entertainment, most of it illegal, plus a few semi-legit casinos, but Red sector caters to those with illicit tastes. It's packed with brothels, spice dens, body mod shops, slave markets, and much, much worse, and most of the business owners there have ties to criminal gangs. Now, keep in mind that not all establishments on Nar Shaddaa are human-friendly. This is pretty much the only major port where humans are a small minority, so aliens that really, really hate humans tend to congregate here, where they can marginalize humans to their heart's content. There's a bunch of establishments here that cater to these types, chief among them the Jek Jek Tar in the refugee sector. The Jek Jek Tar is a bar of sorts, built in the tunnels under the sector docks. It's not an ordinary bar though, it's full of cyanogen gas. In humans and a number of other species, cyanogen gas metabolizes to cyanide in the body, and it can kill both through inhalation and skin contact. In a lot of other species though, cyanogen is an intoxicant. Non-humans of all kinds go to the Jek Jek Tar to get drunk on the fumes, and cyanogen's effects on humans has the added benefit of keeping our kind out. The Jek Jek Tar is also a notorious criminal haunt. There's a whole fortress beneath it, built thousands of years ago by Screeches, a local boss of the Exchange. The Exchange used to be very powerful on Nar Shaddaa back during the Sith Wars, despite the fact that they were in constant competition with the Hutts. At one point, the Nar Shaddaa Exchange was led by a boss named Goto, who had droid spies all over the moon, which he used to locate and hijack cargo ships belonging to Vogga the Hutt, one of the Hutt cartel's leaders at the time. Goto drove Vogga up a wall until a bunch of bounty hunters he'd double-crossed blew up his yacht in orbit, after which the Exchange never really recovered. But plenty of other criminal groups have moved in to fill the void. Naturally, Nar Shaddaa's full of Hutt cartel enterprises, but virtually every criminal underworld faction worth its spice has a presence on the Smuggler's moon, whether they're Black Sun or a smaller outfit. There are a ton of local gangs too. The Bleeders are a particularly nasty one, a band of organ harvesters operating out of the Red Sector, kidnapping travelers and selling their guts on the black market. There's also plenty of slavers. Some, like Red Eclipse, are freelance, while some work directly for the Hutts. The Bisadi clan in particular has a bunch of Talander Till street preachers that they use to lure people into slavery on Elysia, one of the most nightmarish of the Hutt spice worlds. But some of the worst abuses on Nar Shaddaa are actually the work of legitimate enterprises. The lowest levels of most sectors are dominated by manufacturing and even mining, and there are a few sectors like the aptly named industrial sector that are completely given over to industry. Nar Shaddaa's industrial areas are run down but quite profitable, and corporations from all over the galaxy manufacture stuff here, taking advantage of the planet's cheap and abundant labor pool, as well as complete lack of regulation. In fact, a lot of the galaxy's most cutting-edge tech is made here, in the lower levels of the city, where corporations can avoid Republic scrutiny and do as much unethical testing as they want. They've polluted some of the lower areas so badly that the people living there have become mindless mutants, like in the Undercity of Coruscant. It just goes to show, even on Nar Shaddaa, the most dangerous scum are the legitimate ones. Good to see you didn't get lost in the Cathol Rift. I wasn't sure whether you'd make it back or not. With the builders long gone or imprisoned, you'd think the galaxy would be a safer place. But the truth is that there's always another ancient terror just waiting around the corner. Only some of them never went away. The story I have to share today is about the Killiks, a species of mostly intelligent insectoids. But, Spacer, you ask, what's so bad about a bug? Well, for starters, anyone who's asking that question has never come face to face with a collocoid. For seconds, Killiks aren't your average bug. They were alive long before the galaxy ever dreamt of a republic, and they're still alive today, unchanged, unrelenting, and occasionally dangerously aggressive. Something most folks don't know about the Killiks is that while they're all one species, that doesn't really mean what most expect it to. You see, while all Killiks are Killiks, they don't all look alike. Killiks live in large colonies called a nest, and every member of the nest has the same general characteristics. When it comes to other nests, though, their members are very different. Depending on the nest's environment, Killiks can vary physically, some being larger or smaller, or having different forms and shapes. Despite this genetic diversity, they still have enough in common to be classified as one species, however. The most notable common trait is that they're insects, usually bipedal, with 4 arms protruding out of their torsos, each of which ends in a 3-toed claw. They also have some frightening mandibles sticking out of their lower jaws with multifaceted eyes. Their skin color comes in multiple shades from brown to scarlet, but most of their body is covered in a durable, chitinous exoskeleton that shines with a subtle greenish hue. And when I say durable, I mean it. Killik exoskeletons have been found in nearly pristine condition despite being thousands of years old. Their chitinous armor contains several spiracles, which are essentially an opening to allow air to flow in and this allows them to breathe. Like I said, they all vary in size. Some are as small as 7.5 centimeters. Most are roughly human-sized, but there are stories about Killiks as tall as 50 meters. Personally, I try not to think about that. Now, if you know anything about bee society, this next part won't sound so bad. Most Killiks are female, just like with bees, and their female workers get stuff done. They only keep a few males around for breeding purposes, only intentionally birthing more when they decide to form a new nest and expand. Then, these fresh males get sent out to repopulate the new nest. Any given Killik can lay up to 1,000 eggs in a month. Those eggs hatch into baby Killik larvae, and these larvae grow into battle-ready nymphs within a year of hatching. By their second year, they're fully grown and ready to make Killik babies of their own. If you do the maths, the numbers are terrifying on how fast these nests can grow. A single Killik female and male could lead to over 1 million Killiks within 2 years, then over 1 billion in 4. Also, like bees, they built their ancient hives around a queen, though these days it's said they've modernized and have abandoned that behavior. Killiks have many ways of communicating. They all speak a common language, simply known as Killik, but aside from it, they also communicate using electromagnetic transmissions, long-distance telepathy, and pheromones. The latter especially is what makes a nest a nest. All Killiks together create a pheromonal aura of constant shared telepathy, which basically means they're one giant hive mind. Because of this hive-minded collective identity, Killiks don't have individual identities like you or me. They only see themselves as a part of the hive, and because they have no individual value, they don't hesitate to sacrifice one or thousands of their own for the nest's good. For example, if one of them is injured, they don't bother treating them, or if their nest is running low on food, they'll send scores of them out to die to save the rest of them. To them, it's nothing. To people like us, it's very uncomfortable behavior, which is why other sentient species generally don't get along with them. You know when I mentioned lack of food? This is generally a problem for them. They'll build a city and stay there, creating art like mosaics that record history. But when the area they're living in runs dry of resources, they pack up their hive and walk out across the plains in search of a new, abundant area to settle down in. Do you remember what I said about Killik pheromones? What I didn't mention before is that they don't only have an effect on Killiks. Any non-Killiks that are exposed to these pheromones undergo a series of changes. That brings us to the topic of joiners. And if you ever meet one, you'll understand what I mean when I say they're creepy as all Sith. Joiners are what people call non-Killiks who have assimilated into the hive and become one of the bug people, which is why they're also called bug sluts. Their eyes have turned black from the Killik hormones, and they speak as one of the hive, using we and other such language. It's not just for show either. The pheromones they're exposed to restructure their brains in such a way that they too can receive telepathic communication. They're not just acting, they're literally part of the hive mind. Joiners are very useful because they help the hive expand. Visitors become joiners, who then help the hive with tasks the Killiks can't complete themselves, or with diplomacy. That said, they're not very big on diplomacy. Quite the opposite, in fact. To the Killiks, war isn't frightening. It's part of the galaxy's cycle of change, and as such, they embrace it with as industrious a nature as they do anything else. When the Killiks go to war, they unite all the different nests into one mean killing machine. Since every nest is specialized at something different, they can put the different pieces together and with their hive mind, create a truly terrifying army of billions that aren't afraid to die for their nest. So imagine one nest does the heavy hitting, while another does aerial support or non-combat support. Their cooperation is terrifyingly efficient, which is why they survive for tens of thousands of years, practically unchanged. No one really knows how old the Killiks are, but most agree they're ancient. Older than the Republic, old enough to remember us humans as we evolved, while other ancient civilizations ruled the galaxy with technology lost to time. What we do know, however, is that they were native to Onderon. Yes, right here in the core. Back then, though, it wasn't called Onderon. The Killiks remember it as Ouroboros. Because they were so good at building, the beings known only as the Celestials took advantage of them and used them as laborers on different worlds and grand projects. There's even a Killik legend that they had a hand in the construction of the Corellian system, though I struggle to believe that's true. Eventually, the Killiks left Ouroboros en masse. One story goes that they depleted their homeworld's resources, then tried expanding to other planets, trying to take them over, which pissed off the Celestials, who banished them to the unknown regions. Little was left of the Killiks in civilized space but their empty nests, which humans discovered when they finally made their way around the core worlds. But the Killiks weren't really gone. Some nests had been hibernating for millennia, emerging every few hundred years to wreak havoc and then return to sleep. During a distant war between the Republic and the true Sith, they sprung up and tried to reclaim their homeworld, which had blossomed in their absence. Their presence wasn't great for the locals, but it was fantastic for the powers that were, who all tried to study their hive mind and chemical signals in an effort to reproduce them and somehow manage to control humans. No one's sure if they succeeded, but I sincerely hope they did not. In the meantime, the Killiks that migrated to the unknown regions are still there, living on a smattering of worlds like Giorgi. They've kept up their habits of expanding to new worlds, but they've been careful not to be too aggressive about it, which is just as good. The Shiss have decided they're not a big enough threat to warrant a whole new war, so the two are mostly in balance, though rumors say they used to hire the Killiks to do construction work for them. It's hard to say if they're true, but I hope they are, and that the Shiss keep the bugs busy, lest they decide to return to the core and wage war on their former neighbors. And I'm back. Guess who just made the Kessel run in 15 parsecs? That's probably every smuggler's favorite speed record to brag about, and it's one that confuses the uninitiated every time. Yeah, we all know that a parsec is a unit of distance, not time, and any spacer worth their spice could tell you that records for making the Kessel run are measured by how close your ship can get to the moor and survive. That's some seriously hazardous business. Coming within even 20 parsecs of a black hole cluster is courting death, never mind 15 or closer. Many of the people who try it don't come back alive. And the moor isn't just dangerous because of the black holes. There are all sorts of dangers on the Kessel run, some of them ordinary and some of them unexplainable. And I've seen just about all of them. Pretty much the whole Kessel sector is full of astrogational hazards of some kind or another. The Moor Nebula and their associated dangers take up the bulk of the region, and a lot of what's left is covered by Ashteri's Cloud, another dangerous nebula. There's only two major hyperspace routes leading through the sector, which wind through relatively safe pockets of space. The big one is the treacherous trade route, the Hutt Highway, which runs all the way around the back half of Hutt space and acts as the informal edge of the slice. At Formos, the treacherous intersects with the Pabol Sliherion, which cuts through the nebula on its way into Hutt space. The major stops on the treacherous in the Kessel sector are all spice distribution hubs. Formos is the big one, but there's also Dralken, Renok, and the Lexus systems, plus Obadiah a little ways off the route. You get a bit more variety on the Pabol Sliherion. In Japan and Mandarin both distribute into Hutt space, but Randa, the worlds of the Aenid system, Krishella 3, and Little Kessel are all proper colony worlds with little connection to the spice trade, despite their location. There's also Honogir off-route from Little Kessel, but there's nothing worth going all the way out there for. The only planet in the sector that really matters, of course, is Kessel itself. Kessel's a misshapen rock of a planet with a tenuous atmosphere and very little on its surface, circling a blue-white Type B. Most of the settlements here are mines, because the only reason anyone ever go to Kessel would be for glitterstim, the rarest and most potent variety of spice in the galaxy. They actually mine the stuff from fossilized energy spiderwebs, if you can believe it, though I'm sure most of the glitbiters out there neither know nor care. Used to be the mines on Kessel were operated by a volunteer force, back when the Republic ran them directly. But then they contracted the Colicoids to run the place, and now with the Republic on the decline, it's fallen into the hands of the Pike Syndicate, who've had a heavy hand in the underground glitter stim trade ever since it started. The mines are mostly staffed by slaves now, I hear. Not a place you want to end up, that's for sure. Now, glitter stim is super valuable, so Kessel sees a lot of ships looking to haul it off-world, legitimate traders and smugglers alike. The problem is, it's a pain in the arse to actually get to Kessel. The only official route is the Kessel Trade Corridor, which starts at the storm-soaked hellhole Zerm on the Pabal Slayerion and winds its way through the nebula to Kessel. But this route is heavily patrolled. The Republic Judicials used to have a fleet out there before they brought the Colicoids in, and now you've got Pikes and Hutts watching every ship that goes down the corridor. That's why we smugglers started making Kessel runs. There's an alternate route from Kessel, as you surely know, which runs out to Formos through the nebula. However, it's one of the most dangerous routes in the galaxy. Navigating the Maw Nebula is tricky enough on its own. Apart from the huge clouds of ionized gas fracking with your sensors, you've also got loads of young, hot, and very bright blue stars out there, which concentrate in arms that wrap through the nebula. It can be blindingly bright, and sometimes navigating it is barely better than guesswork, even if you're traveling on an established leg of the Kessel Run. The run cuts a tortured course through the nebula from Formos, dodging star clusters, and especially dense or radioactive bits of nebula. Only the most seasoned pilots can make it through, and that's just the beginning of the Kessel Run. Once you get close to Kessel itself, you reach what we smugglers call the Pit. There's two big walls of nebula that you can neither pass through or route around without getting yourself killed, and in the tiny gap between them is a super dense asteroid field. Smugglers heading to Formos from Kessel, who'd have the worst part of the run behind them, sometimes let their guard down when they get to the Pit and end up splattering themselves all over some asteroid. It's just as dangerous coming the other way too, but the Pit is only the second most dangerous part of the Kessel Run. It's after the Pit that you come to the really hazardous bit, which is the Maw. The Maw is a cluster of black holes, a phenomenon so strange that most scientists believe that it can't possibly be natural. I shouldn't really need to tell you that flying close to a black hole is pretty much suicide. Odds are it will tear you and your ship to pieces, even at long range. Unlike what most people think, it's unlikely that you'll get sucked right in, but you'll probably become just another part of the black hole's accretion disk. The accretion disk is a hazard in itself, especially in the Maw, where they're mostly composed of ionized gases from the surrounding nebula. But the Maw is a whole frackin' black hole cluster, which makes it even more dangerous. Most spaces stay on the safe side and don't get any closer than 20 parsecs to it. The daring ones, like myself, try their luck at getting closer, since that can make a Kessel Run significantly faster, which means more profit for moi. Now, all most spacers know about the Maw is that it's on the edge of the Kessel system and part of the Kessel Run, but it's actually much more than just a navigational hazard, if the stories about it are to be believed. I've heard from a few spacers that there are stable routes between some of the black holes in the Maw. I'll believe that when I see it, but there's plenty of rumors of hidden weapons development facilities hidden in the Maw, cut off from the rest of the galaxy. I don't know if that's true, but the Maw's certainly a good place to hide something, provided you find a way to make sure the black holes don't end up hiding it forever. I can't stress enough how strong their gravitational pulls are. The Kessel system itself is slowly being dragged in fact. But secret weapons plants aren't the only things that are supposedly hidden in the Maw. I mentioned earlier that most scientists believe that there's no way the Maw is natural. A natural cluster of black holes would be unstable, with the various black holes merging or ejecting each other from the cluster through sheer force of gravity. But the Maw is surprisingly stable, and the most common theory is that it was built on purpose by the Celestials. This theory is backed up by the fact that the black holes overlap perfectly to completely block access to whatever lies at the center of the cluster. Nothing can escape a black hole once it's past the event horizon. Not matter, not light, and not information either. Usually this effect only applies to what's actually beyond the event horizon. Light that's beyond a black hole, for example, will be wrapped around it by gravitational lensing. But what's unique about the Maw is that the black holes overlap so that whatever's in the center of the cluster, if anything, is completely cut off from the universe. Nothing from the outside galaxy can get in, or see in, or get any sort of information about the inside. And the opposite will apply to anything on the inside trying to reach or observe anything on the outside. The story goes that the nature of the Maw is so unlikely and specific that it must have been built to contain something, to cut it off from the rest of the universe. There's all manner of theories as to what's at the heart of the Maw, but the most detailed story tells of a single lonely world and its parent star banished from the universe, from the Celestials. It's supposed to be the home of some primeval god of chaos, a being whose escape would doom the galaxy. And as a final implication that the nature of the Maw conveys, one that makes this story all the more unsettling. If there is indeed such an entity at the heart of the Maw, then even the Celestials could only contain it, not defeat it. But I don't know if I believe that story. The galaxy's enough of a mess without there being some all-powerful chaos god hiding in the Maw, waiting for the chance to make it worse. Maybe the real chaos god is the wars the Republic started on the way, you know? Hello again. I see you escaped Nar Shaddaa unscathed. It can be good to go somewhere with fewer bounty hunters and more legitimate traders now and again. Oh, speaking of bounty hunters, it seems that line of work's only getting more popular these days. Some of the new small-time hunters are, just kids looking for an exciting career. Some are petty thugs looking for an outlet that isn't illegal. But bounty hunting isn't made for those types. It can be a dangerous job after all, and the seasoned hunters can be just as dangerous as their targets. I've got a few stories about bounty hunters for you today. Some about dangerous hunts, and some about dangerous hunters. I'm going to start with the second category. Now, most bounty hunters work solo or in small teams, but there are a few notable exceptions to this rule. One of the most infamous was the Zoog brothers. They don't exist anymore. They were in operation during the Sith Wars, when the Republic was on the brink, and the galaxy was rapidly descending into lawlessness. A lot of planets were in ruins at the time, and one of them was Juro, which had been scourged by the Mandalorians during the Mandalorian Wars. Even today, 4,000 years later, the planet hasn't fully recovered. The surface of Juro is still the wasteland the Mandalorians turned it into, populated only by factories and mines, and the Juros themselves have abandoned it in favor of orbital cities. Even for how little Juro has recovered so far, the process was slow. Too slow for the liking of some. The Zoog brothers were an army of politically inclined Juros that had issues with their homeworld's post-Mandalorian government, and after years of working in Juro's bureaucracy, they decided that the best way to fix things was to effect policy change with their blasters. When another political family on Juro got in their way, the Zoogs wiped them out, following which they were exiled. But that didn't stop the Zoog brothers. After their exile, they set out to raise enough credits to seize control of Juro. They did this by hiring themselves out as bounty hunters, acting either in small freelance teams or as a group, allowing particularly wealthy clients to hire a whole army of well-trained, well-armed, and ruthless Juros mercenaries. The Zoog brothers raised a ton of money during the Dark Wars, but they bit off more than they could chew when they tried to go for a bounty on what was then believed to be the last of the Jedi. The Jedi and her allies killed several Zoog leaders, including the founders, Dizanti and Azanti Zoog, as well as close to 100 of their followers. The Zoog brothers fell apart after that, and their dreams of seizing Jiro evaporated. While we're talking about bounty hunter groups, there's one that's not just legendary, but mythical: the Geno Haradan. Nobody's entirely sure whether or not these guys even exist, but if the stories are true, the Geno Haradan are an ancient order of bounty hunters that predate the Republic itself. Supposedly, they were founded by Jim the Despot as a sort of secret police, but after the Despot lost a war to the Hutts and was killed, the Geno Haradan went underground, selling their services to the highest bidder. But after the Taiwanese War, in which the Republic conquered their home sector, the Geno Haradan started working primarily for the benefit of the Republic. The legend goes that the Geno Haradan have subtly influenced galactic history via assassination for millennia, with the ultimate aim of keeping the Republic intact and in control of the galaxy. Now, like I said, no one knows how much of the story is true, or if the Geno Haradan still exist. The guild is said to have suffered during the Sith Wars, and nobody knows if they're still around today. But there's evidence to suggest that they at least survived into the present millennium. And there are a few companies that claim to have started as Geno Haradan fronts, such as Taxbeck Corporation. But let's put a pin in talking about bounty hunters for now and talk about some bounty hunts. Some targets are inherently more dangerous than others. You'd have an easier time capturing a Jawa than you would an Anzati. But perhaps the most dangerous targets are, fortunately, the rarest. The Gendai are one of the galaxy's more obscure species. They keep to themselves for the most part, but they're one of the most interesting species in the galaxy. Their nervous systems and pretty much everything else inside their bodies is completely decentralized. The Gendai are pretty much walking nerve clusters, if highly muscular ones. They've also got incredible regenerative abilities, which allows them to regrow limbs, heads, and pretty much anything else in a matter of seconds. Virtually nothing can kill a Gendai, or even slow one down. They live for thousands of years too. You'd need to throw one into a sun to kill them. Now fortunately, the Gendai are peaceful people, at least for the most part. See, the older they get and the more they have to regenerate, the higher the likelihood is that a Gendai becomes, how would you say, unstable? Older Gendai that have had to regenerate a lot sometimes develop psychosis, and a psychotic Gendai is one of the most dangerous beings in the universe. Unlike other members of their species, who next to never leave their homeworld, psychotic Gendai like to wander around the galaxy performing violent acts. Dealing with one of them is probably the most dangerous job a bounty hunter could ask for. One particularly notorious psychotic Gendai is known only as Dirge. Dirge is actually a bounty hunter himself. Well, more of a contract killer, really. But he's had a ton of bounties posted on his head over the years as well. He fought in the last of the Sith Wars on the side of the Sith, and he developed a taste for killing Jedi, something his unusual physique made relatively easy. He also developed a vendetta against the Mandalorians. He even killed the reigning Mandalore at one point. Naturally, the Mandalorians didn't like this, and they put out a death mark on Dirge. But they couldn't kill him. They joined a long list of people who tried and failed to put that lunatic down for good. Mandalorians, Jedi, Sith, blood boilers of Kragis. Dirge has survived them all. 60 years ago, though, the Mandalorians managed to capture Dirge. From what I've heard, they've set him on fire and then buried him alive. He's probably still out there, though, and I don't envy the next bounty hunter that ends up trying to rein him in. My last story is about both a dangerous hunter and a dangerous hunt. Maybe you've heard of Hanha, the Mad Wookiee, who in his time was one of the most fearsome bounty hunters in the entire galaxy. Nowadays, the Wookiees are one of the most respected members of the galactic community, but back in Hanha's day, they were obscure. Kashyyyk was beyond the limits of Republic space, and Circa Corporation took advantage of that to occupy the planet and enslave the Wookiees. Hanha was one of the Wookiees they captured. As the story goes though, before Zerka got to Hanha, he had been in exile. He was bloodthirsty, and his tribe thought he was dangerous, so they cast him out to live in the Shadowlands. They were right, of course. He came back some time later after Circa came to Kashyyyk and killed them all. The entire tribe. That was how Circa found him, standing over the bodies in a deserted village. They put him in chains and hauled him off-world, but he escaped during transit and killed the crew of the slave ship one by one, hunting them like the animals they were. But that was just the start for Hanha. The ship crashed on Nar Shaddaa, where Hanha re-established himself. He started work as a local bounty hunter, and before long, he was able to expand off-world. But Hanha was less of a hunter and more of a butcher, and he exclusively hunted humans whom he hated due to what Circa had done to him. In revenge for Kashyyyk, he took every opportunity to kill, torture, or enslave humans, selling them to the Hutts back on Nar Shaddaa. But there was one human he hated more than any other, and his vendetta against her ended up being his undoing. One of the crime lords on Nar Shaddaa put out a bounty on one of the other local hunters, a young woman named Mira. Hanha took the job for a discount. He'd heard about her and jumped at the chance to kill her. He'd set a trap for Mira in Nar Shaddaa's sewers, laying a minefield he intended to drive her into. But Mira was a demolitions expert, and she was able to make it through the minefield no problem. Hanha wasn't so lucky. The mines blew up in his face, and he was nearly killed. Mira had him dead to rights, but she let him live. See, Mira's whole deal was that she never killed her targets, and she wasn't even going to make an exception for someone like Hanha. But Wookiees, as you may know, had a life debt system, and all of this meant that Hanha owed a life debt to Mira. This drove him insane, and he made it his mission to repay the debt by killing her. The two bounty hunters chased each other all over Nar Shaddaa, and eventually all over the galaxy. Mira ended up becoming a Jedi, and after she started her training, she became too much for Hanha to handle. They say their final battle was on Malachor 5, right before it was destroyed. No one knows how exactly Hanha met his end. Maybe Mira killed him, or maybe he just died with the planet. But in the end, his lust for revenge did him in, and the Mad Wookiee was no more. Hello again. Good to have you back. I've got another story for you today of an entity so horrifying the gods themselves tried to rip the universe in two to keep it from destroying all life. Folks call it Nal Nal, an entity out of the unknown regions. If you've ever flown out that far, or met people who've come back from those distant worlds, you know there's plenty of strange and terrifying creatures out there. I've probably told you about some. Creatures we know little about, but enough to know we should be afraid. Nal Nal is a whole lot more than that though. It's a legend, a myth, a nightmare that's visited many worlds and never left. Not much is known about Nal Nal. It's been around so long, even ancient stories about it were written when the entity was ancient itself. Some say it's an extra-dimensional being, one that should have never arrived in our galaxy. Another unknown region species, the Shis, have made it a point to study Nal as much as they can, and they say it's similar to Waru, a healer entity from another dimension. But like all the others, this is just a theory. Truth is, Nal is on no official species catalog, and there's so little about it that's certain that not even famous institutions like the University of Sanbra have much info on it. But Nal has shared some stories about itself over the years, mostly through victims who somehow managed to escape Hail. The entity claims to be as old as the Celestials themselves, the old gods said to have built the Corellia system and hyperspace anomalies all over the galaxy. It's old enough to have borne witness when they left our galaxy for good. And if the Celestials and Nal really did share a galaxy at one point in time, many believe the Celestials would have tried to do something to protect us. You've heard of the hyperspace anomaly that cuts the galaxy in two, haven't you? Some believe that the Celestials had a hand in that, cutting the highly populated regions of our galaxy off from the unknown regions in an effort to stop Nal from infecting every world and destroying all life. Because that's what Nal is all about. It's an entity made up entirely of a thick grey ooze, slimy and smelling like the sweet scent of decay. And it's quicker than you might expect. It can shapeshift, manipulating its thick ooze into shapes like eye stalks, pseudopods, hands, anything you can imagine. It can form a mouth with razor-sharp teeth to bite your head off, or misshapen wings to take to the skies with. And sure, it can't exactly shapeshift into complex beings, but it doesn't have to. Believe me, it's plenty dangerous enough as it is. And above all else, what Nal is an infestation. A plague that's spreading throughout the galaxy, and there's little anyone can do about it. What I haven't told you yet is that Nal isn't like another species like the Waru. There is only one, the Nal, but you'd be forgiven for thinking otherwise if you'd seen its physical shape, as aforementioned, because Nal is a body of grey ooze and it never stops spreading. Nal moves by infecting other creatures. Sometimes it will make shapes out of its ooze to creep up on someone. Other times it will lie still in innocent-looking pools, only to explode upwards the moment a creature comes near. And it needs very little to infect something. Just a few drops of Nal's ooze are enough to do you in. The ooze will creep up into your mouth or nose, inside your body through the pores of your skin. Really, any passageway into your body is good enough. And once it's inside you, it travels up into your skull, digesting your brain first, then your internal organs and tissues, eating you from the inside out until you're a hollow shell full of Nal. What's worse is Nal can and will eat anything. Trees, animals, insects. As long as it's not Nal or lifeless rock, Nal will consume it. However, it prefers to eat sentience, and it's not because we taste the best, it's because we're the best way it can spread and infect even more sentience. Within 24 hours of Nal entering you, you're dead. No cure, no chance of survival, and if you try to get help, chances are you'll only condemn those people to the same fate as you. But your role in Nal's plan doesn't end with your insides turned to grey ooze. If I'm honest with you, that's only when Nal's fun begins. After its victims are dead, Nal can control them at will, piloting them like an ooze-filled meat suit. It's accurate enough to make its puppets pilot vehicles, even talk, though the victim's voice sounds like little more than an undead buzz, as Nal digests their vocal cords and tongue. Really, you can easily spot a Nal victim if you looked closely enough. Their stares are empty and lifeless. They walk around stiff-jointed and awkward, and stay eerily still when Nal isn't using their meat suit. Even more telling, within a week, they start decomposing, with grey slime oozing out of their orifices. That said, if you're close enough to identify a Nal victim, it's probably already too late for you, let's be honest. The reason Nal Nal takes control of its victims is because through puppeting them towards other sentients, it can infect new victims and spread itself even further. And this is where the truly mind-boggling truth comes into play. You might look at a Nal Nal victim out on a space station, then at a pool of Nal Nal down on a planet's surface, and think they're two different beings. But remember what I said, Nal Nal is not a species, it's an entity. All those pieces you see, all those victims in separate pools of slime, they are all Nal Nal, all part of one being so vast, it boggles the imagination. By this point, I can't even tell you how far it's spread. Out in the unknown regions, there's a planet called Mog Fallow. Once it was probably a beautiful planet. Now though? Now it's an empty husk of a world. It's all Nal Nal. There's no life left. Nal Nal flows in rivers across its surface, it forms its oceans, and fills underground caves with so much of itself that you can't quite comprehend its size. All that's left of Mog Fallow are lifeless continents and the occasional husk of a fossilized tree. And you can tell Nal Nal it's proud of its work. It hasn't just abandoned Mog Fallow in search of a new planet to infest. No. Instead, it has victims pilot ships into orbit around the planet, then leaves them there, a ring of derelict ghost ships as proof of all the lives it's taken over the millennia. Force knows what you'd find if you dared explore that ghost fleet, but travelers braver than I have seen grease sail ships and a treasure barge belonging to Jim the Despot amidst the wreckage. But Nal Nal isn't satisfied with its grotesque work of art. It spreads the plague of the unknown regions to countless moons, space stations, other worlds. On some, it's nothing more than an isolated pool of malevolent ooze lying in wait for its next hapless victim, but on others it has spread far and wide until it overtook everything just as it has on Mog Fallow. Thankfully, there are people out there who've noticed what Nal Nal's been up to, and they've been doing what they can to stop it, recognizing that the entity has the potential to destroy all life as we know it. Some species, like the Lagubra and the Croak, are focusing on defense, screening ships and doing all they can to prevent Nal Nal from infecting their territories. Others are taking a more aggressive stance. The Shiss in particular have gathered the greatest volume of information on Nal Nal in the Great Data Library of Scylla. They've been thorough too. Everything from Mog Fallow's history and location to origin stories can be found in those databanks. They don't stop at that either. They actively place bounties on Nal Nal infestations, hiring bounty hunters and other adventurers to destroy them before they spread further. And they don't really have a choice. Time and again throughout history, Nal Nal has changed the course of events, from decimating the Vis Empire to other minor events in the unknown regions few know about and even fewer care about. But oh, should they care? Because Nal Nal isn't just a mindless entity spreading across the galaxy. No, it's a being of pure evil, and it enjoys every second of its hellish activities. Normally I don't like throwing heavy words like evil and depraved around, but that's just because I save those words for beings like Nal Nal. I'm sure you know plenty of creatures across the galaxy that can't help what they feed on, like the Anzati, who are driven mad by their hunger for soup. Nal Nal isn't like them. Above all else, Nal Nal wants control. It wants to take over as much as possible, and it enjoys it. Like I said, it cherishes Mog Fallow like a treasured jewel, and if it could, it would transform every planet in our galaxy into another ooze-infested hellscape. But what really sends a chill down my spine is that the entity enjoys it. You can just tell. Killing and torturing sentience isn't just a means to an end, but a game to Nal Nal. Some believe it enjoys the process of torturing a sentient being more than it likes feasting on their insides. And from what some ghost-faced smugglers have said, I'm inclined to believe them. Some stories tell of Nal Nal infesting a child, then using the child's reanimated, rotting corpse to emotionally torture its mother over and over. Others tell of the entity taking over sentience then controlling their bodies to persuade their still living loved ones to make terrible decisions, like opening an airlock or luring a security perimeter fence. That's just how fickle and sadistic Nal is. Even in its original form, it likes to talk to people. It will speak in riddles and metaphors to confuse its victims and spin tall tales of ancient beings and long-lost treasures. It's so old, it could very well know of all these long-forgotten secrets, but with Nal, it's impossible to tell if it's sending to you a secret treasure trove or to some innocent grey puddle just waiting for a ride. Nal is a trickster you better hope you never run into on a cold, forgotten moon out in the unknown regions. But don't start feeling safe just yet. There are reports that infestations of it have been spotted in wild space and the outer rim territories we've only recently just talked about. It's spreading, and one day, it'll be here too. Remember what I said about recognizing its zombie victims. Watch your step, my friend. And please, stay safe out there. I think that's enough storytelling for one day. Maybe next time, I'll have a nicer story to tell.
Hey there. It's been a while since I last saw you. What brings you all the way to Onderon? Well, in any event, I've got a special treat for you while you're here. Onderon's absolutely steeped in history. This planet and its moons have far more dark secrets than most people here in Aziz would like to admit. Onderon was the flashpoint that sparked off the old Sith Wars, and a lot of dark groups left their mark on it. Fallen Jedi, Mandalorians, even the Sith. Most people here don't talk about that side of Onderonian history. The people of Aziz prefer to keep their dark past buried and forgotten. But what do you say that we dig that dark past back up, eh? Though you might want to grab yourself a drink before we start. This is gonna be one long tale. First, some background. Unless you came here on autopilot, you probably know that Onderon is the only inhabited world in the Jeprio system, and the capital of the Inner Rim's Jeprio sector. Most of this part of the Inner Rim was explored over 10,000 years ago, during the Republic's initial period of expansion, but Onderon was apparently overlooked, or at least ignored. It didn't see its first visit until around 5,000 years ago, and it wasn't connected to the greater galaxy until many centuries later, when the lesser Lantilian route was blazed. Nowadays, it's a fairly popular stop. You get a lot of traffic coming in from Zeltros that stops here before heading out into the Rim. That wasn't always the case though. Back when Onderon was first settled, the Jeprio system was uncharted and untamed. Onderon is the second planet from its star, and it's the only inhabitable planet orbiting it. If you stick around until nightfall, you'll see that it's got 4 moons: Suthra, Dagri, Ivas, and Duxun. The first 3 are barren rocks that orbit at a respectful distance. Duxun, on the other hand, doesn't understand the concept of personal space. Duxun's habitable, at least theoretically, with an atmosphere and a wide array of native animals, and it orbits closer than any other moon I've ever heard of. Closer than it should be possible for a moon to orbit a planet. It takes up a massive portion of the Onderonian sky, looming large day and night, and once every star, it passes so close that the atmospheres of Duxun and Onderon merge, forming an oxygen bridge that allows flying beasts to migrate between the moon and the planet. Onderon and Duxun have been described as twin planets, and honestly, it's an accurate description. Even their environments are similar. Both Onderon and its 4th moon are covered in jungles, which are broken up only by small clearings and ranges of mountains. The other thing Onderon and Duxun have in common is that they're not terribly hospitable. Onderon's original settlers found that out the hard way thousands of years ago. It's unclear whether they came here on purpose or whether they crashed, but one way or another, they ended up stranded on this rock without space travel technology. They were humans, that much we know, and they also seem to have not had all that much high technology, at least not at first. That left them completely unprepared to face the monsters that call Duxun Moon home. The plants and beasts of Onderon and Tatooine have fascinated scientists for millennia, mostly for one simple reason: they're some of the most aggressive in the galaxy. They're so reliably aggressive that the Republic likes to use Onderonian biota for terraforming, since they can entrench themselves on new worlds pretty much overnight. Even the plants spread quickly. You'll see the purple leaves of Onderonian plants or the thick vines and trees of the Tatooine moon on many fully destroyed planets as a result. For the most part though, it was the beasts that gave the early Onderonians trouble. Some of Onderon's beasts are mostly docile, and nowadays the likes of Arcanox and Dalgos are frequently domesticated. But most of Onderon's animals are vicious predators, from the lumbering Orlax to the fiercely territorial Boma. But the worst of all are the Drexel, enormous flying monsters with teeth the size of your arm and claws strong enough to rend durasteel. Drexel aren't native to Onderon, they came from Tatooine, but every summer they migrate back and forth between the two worlds, looking for easy meals in the wilds of Onderon. And the early Onderonians made very easy meals. The Onderonians who survived the first onslaught of Drexel were forced to band together. They gathered into one settlement, which they fortified as best they could. Over the years, their weapons technology rapidly advanced, and they used it to defend their settlement against the annual Drexel onslaught. Over time, the walls of this settlement grew larger, and the settlement itself expanded, becoming the great city where we are right now, the city of Isis. Even today, Isis is the only city on the planet, the only city in the system even, but it's grown a lot since its early days. It covers 1,600 square kilometers and is home to 4 million people, the vast majority of whom are humans. The threat of the jungles has lessened somewhat since the city was founded, but the people of Isis still keep within its walls, which remain heavily fortified and constantly garrisoned. Fundamentally, the Onderonians are, and always have been, warriors, standing watch over their battlements, defensive by default, and quick to see the unfamiliar as a threat. In keeping with this, Isis has a long and proud military tradition, and the Onderon military has a lot of power in the city. They double as the city's police force, which seems like a bad idea to me, but it's been that way for thousands of years and doesn't seem like it will change anytime soon. The military maintains barracks, armory depots, and garrisons all over Isis, and the city is also dotted with air defense towers crowned with turbo laser turrets. Obviously, these were originally built to defend the city against Drexel, but they've since been used to fend off Mandalorians and Sith alike. The outer barrier of Isis is known only as the Wall, and it's absolutely enormous, a long row of huge rock slabs. The outer side is like a cliff, dotted with turrets and crowned with highly defensible battlements. Air defense towers are built into it at regular intervals, and the wall only has a single gate, which features a moat for added security. The battlements of the wall are accessed through a network of sky ramps, lesser fortifications that run all throughout the city. The sky ramps loom over most of the residential areas, dividing Isis into quarters and sectors, and they're dotted with bunkers and towers. Access points for the sky ramps are clustered around the inner districts of the city for defensive purposes. The city is divided into a ton of districts, some residential and some industrial. Some of the notable ones are the lower city, which is poor and home to a bunch of armory depots, the south quarter where you've got industry and mining, and the merchant quarter, where we are right now, which is wealthier and devoted to commerce. You probably docked at the Isis starport, which is just off the merchant quarter, overlooking the lower districts of the city. Isis also has an undercity, mostly abandoned, which stretches for dozens of levels beneath the surface. Much of it is unmapped, and many who venture down into the deepest parts of it never return. There's also a track for swoop racing down there though, so it's not all spooky ancient ruins. At the heart of Isis is the royal palace, the home of the regent and the officers of the Onderonian government. The original royal palace is located at the top of a steep hill, surrounded on all sides by battlements and watchtowers. The main gates are accessible only by a single sky ramp leading out from the merchant quarter, and all told, the palace is probably the most well-defended part of the city. There's a lot of priceless treasures locked up in there, after all. Even the regents themselves don't really live there anymore. Nowadays, the monarchy's relocated to the Unifar Temple down near Yolan Square, which is also very well defended. Speaking of the monarchy, let's talk about Onderon's government. Onderon's royal family has actual political power, unlike the monarchies of many worlds, which are little more than traditional figureheads. The regent has authority over the Onderon military, has final say over Onderon's diplomatic relations with other worlds and with the Republic, and acts as the chair of the Council of Lords. The council manages Aziz's internal affairs and is made up both of other members of the royal family and of unrelated aristocrats. The current king of Onderon is Ramses Denda, who rules from the Unifar Temple. The Onderon royal family traces its roots back over 4,000 years to some of the most revered leaders in Onderonian history, among them Queen Galia, who united the people of Onderon and brought them into the Republic, and Queen Talia, who staved off a civil war started by an early separatist movement. But the royal family has its origins with a line of far darker figures, and the dynasty was started by a tyrant that few on Onderon dare to even name, a Sith Lord. It's a part of Onderonian history that's taboo to talk about here, but we will anyway. 4,400 years ago, a Dark Lord of the Sith conquered Onderon, and his name was Freedon Nad. And as the story goes, he had once been a Jedi. One of the Jedi's most promising students, even. He was powerful and highly skilled, and he knew it too. For that reason, the Jedi Masters chose to hold him back, refusing to make him a Jedi Knight until he confronted his pride and his arrogance. Freedon Nad did not take that well. The story is that he murdered his master, left the Jedi Order, and then went off to join the Sith, as you do. Nad lived in the centuries just after the Great Hyperspace War, in which the original Sith Empire was destroyed, and in his time, everyone thought the Sith were extinct. But Nad traveled through the ruins of Sith space, learning what he could from holocrons and scrolls that the Jedi had missed when they purged the region. Eventually, these led him to Yavin 4, where he met Nalaga Sado, the Dark Lord who had started the Great Hyperspace War, who was apparently still alive after all this time. Sado taught Nad everything he knew, and then Nad killed him and became the new Dark Lord, of course. With his newfound Sith powers, he set out to conquer a world of his own, and he eventually picked Onderon to be his victor. Freedon Nad used his Sith magic to overthrow the original royal family of Aziz, and he set himself up in their place, declaring himself the king of Onderon. Nad ruled as a tyrant, and he banished anyone that showed the slightest opposition to his rule, throwing them out of Aziz to be mauled by the beasts in the wilderness. His reign was long and terrible. The people of Aziz were brainwashed into worshipping the Sith Lord, and many aspired to join his sect of Sith cultists. Many Jedi Knights who tried to help the people of Onderon were killed at Nad's hand, and over the course of several decades, the Sith Lord established near total control over Aziz, suffusing first the city and then the entire planet with the power of the dark side. Freedon Nad was eventually slain by a Jedi Knight, and the Jedi assumed that that would be the very end of Sith influence on Aziz, but they assumed wrong. Nad's followers continued to rule Onderon in secret, and Aziz's next regent was one of his children, continuing the Dark Lord's royal line. Some stories claim that Nad's spirit stuck around to teach his descendants the ways of the Sith. The Nadists regained near total control over Aziz pretty much as soon as the Jedi left, and the people of Aziz continued to honor Freedon Nad as their god. 400 years after Nad's death, the city was still under Nadist control, and Queen Amanoa and King Omin, the city's regents, were both trained in the Sith arts by the spectre of the ancient Dark Lord. But not all Onderonians were under the thrall of the Nadists. Under Nadist rule, all dissidents were cast out of Aziz. This was considered a death sentence due to the dangers of the Onderonian wilderness, and it had been the punishment for the most serious crimes since the city's founding. But exile from Aziz wasn't as certain a death sentence as the Nadists believed it to be. Some of the exiles learned to survive in the wilderness. They banded together, and they started to tame some of the beasts of the jungle. Over time, they even managed to tame the Drexel of Doksun. They became the Beast Riders, and they stood in fierce opposition to the Nadis tyrants in Aziz. I said earlier that Aziz is the only city on Onderon, and that's true. It's not the only settlement though. There are a scattering of fortresses belonging to Beast Rider clans out in the wilderness, mostly in the highlands. Some of them are inhabited to this day, including Kira Fortress, the greatest of the ancient Beast Rider strongholds, which nowadays is a possession of the Onderon royal family for reasons I'll get to in a wee bit. Many Beast Rider clans still exist, carrying on the traditions of their ancient ancestors. The prominent ones are Clan Ezelk, Amroth, Klaska, and Dordrell. Even today, they tame wild Drexel and other beasts to serve as their mounts. With that said, a lot of Beast Riders have also fallen, as their brethren put it, becoming little more than petty thugs. Gangs of fallen Beast Riders have been known to shake down travelers, so you want to keep an eye out if you ever venture out of the city. The original Beast Riders soon gathered into armies, knowing that conflict with Aziz was inevitable. The Nadis had no interest in marching off into the wild to destroy the Beast Riders, but the Beast Riders weren't going to stand idly by while the dark side tightened its grip on Onderon, and before long, they all went to war. The war was started by the great Beast Lord Kinch Sunka, who led the combined armies of the Beast Riders in an all-out assault on Aziz. Sunka failed to unseat the Nadis, but his attack was only the first of many. The Beast Wars of Onderon raged for centuries after Fridon Nad's death. Time and time again, the Beast Riders would march on Aziz, and the Nadis would fight back with ferocity, turning the city's many turbo lasers against the Drexel Riders that swarmed in their skies. As the years passed, the numbers of the Beast Riders swelled as the Nadis continued the practice of exiling their criminals, and the Beast Riders started recruiting anyone who was cast out of Aziz. The Beast Wars escalated until the reign of the Nadis queen, Amanoa, who, desperate to end the war and crush the Beast Riders, requested assistance from the Jedi of all people. Amanoa tried to frame the Beast Riders as being savage, lawless raiders preying on an innocent, enlightened civilization, hoping that that sort of imagery would dupe the Jedi into doing her dirty work for her. As the story goes, the first group of Jedi sent to Onderon were all young apprentices, and they bought it at first, especially after the Beast Riders kidnapped Amanoa's daughter, Princess Gallia, before their very eyes. But the Jedi learned the truth after they pursued the kidnappers back to Fortress Kira, where it was revealed that Gallia had gone with the Beast Riders willingly. She hated the Nadists and wanted to marry Oron Kira, the son of reigning Beast Lord Modol Kira, to help the Beast Riders overthrow her mother and drive the dark side from Aziz. The Beast Riders then carried out another all-out assault on Aziz, and this time, with the help of the Jedi, they were able to capture the city. Queen Amanoa was slain by the Jedi, and Gallia became the new queen. She married Oron Kira as planned, uniting the Beast Riders and the people of Aziz, purged the government of the Nadists, and brought Onderon into the Galactic Republic. Some of the Jedi, including Master Arca Jeth, stuck around to protect her new government and finished cleansing the planet of Fridon Nad's influence, and they all lived happily ever after. Just kidding, of course they didn't. It takes more than a change in government to unbrainwash an entire city, never mind convince them to make peace with enemies they've been hating for centuries. Even though many people in Aziz leapt at the first chance to abandon the Nadis ways, there were still Sith cultists all over the city. Aziz was in chaos for the first few years of Queen Gallia's rule, consumed by constant unrest. The Jedi did their best to protect her and her government, but there were only a handful of them, and the Nadis still had a few tricks up their sleeves. After a year or two, the Jedi determined that there were still potent sources of the dark side in Aziz, and that these were part of the reason for the unrest. The tomb of Fridon Nad, which at the time was located under the royal palace, was the strongest of these. Thus, the Jedi ordered a new tomb to be built on the far side of Doksun. When it was completed, 2 years after Gallia's ascension to the throne, the Jedi attempted to relocate the sarcophagi of Nad and Amanoa to the new tomb. It was then that the Nadis struck. All at once, the Nadis rose up and caused chaos all over Aziz, while a strike force attacked the funeral procession and stole the coffins of Nad and Amanoa, spiriting them away to a dark fortress deep beneath the city. These Nadists were led by King Omin, Amanoa's husband. His studies into Sith magic caused his body to decay until he was too much of a vegetable to be a regent anymore, leading to Amanoa taking over his duties. Everyone thought Omin was powerless and mostly dead, but in reality he was just biding his time. With the help of the spirits of Freedon Nad and a metal armature that allowed him to move, Omin returned and attempted to take control of Aziz once more, now openly acting on behalf of the dark side. Omin's right-hand man was a dark Jedi named Warb Null, an armored warrior that even the Jedi struggled to defeat. With Freedon Nad helping them from beyond the grave, the Nadists were able to take control of Aziz and capture Arca Jeth, the Jedi Master in charge of the Jedi group on Onderon. Galia, Oron Kira, and the other Jedi were forced to flee back to Fortress Kira, where the Beast Riders held the line against the Nadists. Ultimately, they called for backup from the Jedi Order, which in turn requested Republic intervention. They got both. Several Jedi, including future Grandmaster Nomi Sunrider, were sent to Onderon to defeat the Nadists, and the Republic deployed battalions of rocket jumpers in yet another assault on Aziz. Ultimately, the Joint Jedi Republic Beast Rider Task Force was successful. Warb Null was killed by the Jedi Knight Ulic Keldroma, and King Omin died after his armature was destroyed, which caused his bones to give out and his body to crumple like a little tin can. Arca Jeth banished the spirit of Freedon Nad from Onderon, cleansing Aziz of the dark side once and for all, and the Nadists were utterly crushed. Queen Galia was restored to power, this time with the fervent support of most of Aziz. In time, she was able to unite Onderon's twin civilizations, for real this time, stabilizing the planet and beginning an era of genuine peace in Aziz. And, as planned, the Jedi relocated the sarcophagi of Freedon Nad, Queen Amanoa, and now also King Omin to the new tomb on Duxun. Said tomb is probably Duxun's most imposing feature. The tomb of Freedon Nad used to be located in a lush clearing on the shore of a lake, but nowadays it's just a big mud flat, entirely devoid of life. Nothing can grow in the shadow of that cursed tomb. The tomb was built out of black rock and Mandalorian iron, designed to be impenetrable even to lightsabers, but it was eventually breached anyway. The design of it has also changed over the centuries, warped by the power of the evil that lies within. On the outside, it looks like a sort of ziggurat built into the side of a mountain, flanked by obelisks and sword-wielding statues. On the inside, a network of tunnels winds deep under the mountain, running between storerooms and a deep crypt where the sarcophagi of Nad, Amanoa, and Omin are stored. A ton of ancient Sith treasures collected by Freedon Nad used to be stored there, including Nad's old lightsaber, but most of that stuff was looted long ago. Speaking of Duxun, let's talk about Onderon's fourth moon. The people of Aziz call it the Demon Moon, and given that's where all the worst of the beasts come from, I think that's pretty fair. Duxun is a dark place in its own right, though. They say it's a nexus of the dark side, and it has been since before Freedon Nad's corpse was parked there, though that certainly didn't help. Duxun is even more dangerous than Onderon, one of the most dangerous places in the galaxy even. The jungles are denser, more wild, and more aggressive than those on Onderon, and the beasts are worse too. Even the air on Duxun is harsh and hard to breathe, and the moon is racked by constant rainstorms. Every moment there is a struggle, an endless war for survival. A number of the plants on Duxun are carnivorous, and some, like the krasnal, will even eat humans if they get the opportunity. But the beasts are the real threat. Unlike on Onderon, everything that moves on Duxun can kill you, and will try to do so given the slightest opportunity. On the smaller end, you've got the Canucks, notorious for their willingness to eat everything, and the Malras, a subspecies of whom, known as night hunters, can make themselves more or less invisible. On the larger end of the scale, you've got Bomas, densely armored Zakeks, and of course, Drexel. All told, Duxun is a very inhospitable place for anyone who doesn't enjoy being devoured by ferocious beasts. The Onderonians left Doksun alone for the most part, even under the reign of Freedon Nad. They never even considered establishing settlements or military installations there. The oldest known structure on the moon is the Tomb of Freedon Nad, which the Jedi hoped that nobody would dare to visit if they stuck it on the far side of the Demon Moon. Unfortunately for the whole galaxy, this ended up not being enough of a deterrent. Just a year after the body of Freedon Nad was moved there, the tomb on Doksun was visited by a Jedi Knight named Exar Kun. Kun broke in and had a face-to-face encounter with Nad's spirit, who led him to Korriban, Yavin 4, and down the path of the dark side. Exar Kun ended up declaring himself the Dark Lord of the Sith and using Sith magic to destroy Nad's ghost. Just over a year after the Nadish revolt, Exar Kun and another fallen Jedi, Ulic Qel-Droma, started the Great Sith War, which threw the entire galaxy into chaos. During the war, Qel-Droma won the loyalty of the Mandalorian Crusaders in an honor duel with their leader, Mandalore the Indomitable. The Mandalorians were allies of the Sith in the war, conquering worlds in the name of the Dark Lords, and near the end of the conflict they set their sights on Onderon. Mandalore the Indomitable himself led the Mandalorian attack on Onderon, but he and his forces were defeated by the combined efforts of the military in Aziz and the Drexel cavalry of the Beast Riders. The Mandalorians were driven back to Doksun in disarray, where Mandalore, the not-so-indomitable anymore, but never mind, was ambushed by the jungle beasts. Cut off from the rest of his men, he was overwhelmed and mauled. The Onderonians and the Republic decided not to pursue the Mandalorians who had fled to Doksun, figuring that they would all be wiped out in the jungle. This, they later learned, was a severe mistake. Even though Mandalore was killed by the Doksun beasts, many of his warriors survived, including one who found Mandalore's mask. By Mandalorian tradition, he became the new Mandalore, Mandalore the Ultimate. He rebuilt the strength of the Mandalorians, transforming them into the Neo-Crusaders, and he claimed Doksun as his stronghold. The Mandalorians built a secret fortress on Doksun, on the far side of the moon, not far from the tomb of Freedon Nad. For 30 years, the Mandalorians sent new recruits there to train in secret, amassing an enormous army meant for a grand crusade against the Republic. The new Mandalore taught that the Mandalorians should have a rapport with Doksun. The jungle weeded out the weak, and on the Demon Moon, war was the constant state of all life, something Mandalore believed the Mandalorians should learn from. By facing the monsters of the Doksun Moon, the Mandalorian Neo-Crusaders became one of the most fearsome armies the galaxy had ever seen. 20 years after Exar Kun's defeat, they began raiding systems beyond the fringe of the Republic, slowly building an empire. A decade after that, they attacked the Republic directly. When the Mandalorian Wars began, they began from Doksun. Onderon was the first Republic world the Mandalorians conquered. One day, without warning, basilisk war droids and their Mandalorian riders rained from the sky, destroying the Onderonians' ancient defenses. This time, Aziz fell in a matter of hours, beginning a long period of Mandalorian occupation. And Onderon was only the first of many worlds to meet with such a fate. From Doksun, the Mandalorians commanded an armada that ravaged the Republic, which could do very little to defend itself. The Onderonians, for their part, resisted the Mandalorians. The Beast Riders fought a protracted war against the invaders, and in Aziz, General Vaklu, a member of the royal family, led a resistance movement. His cousin, soon-to-be Queen Talia, appealed constantly to the Republic for aid, but Onderon remained under Mandalorian control until after the revanchists joined the fight. If you know anything about ancient history, you probably know the Republic begged the Jedi for help in the Mandalorian Wars, and the Jedi Council refused. But some Jedi went to join the fight anyway, led by two charismatic young knights named Revan and Malak. They turned the tide of the war, slowly driving the Mandalorians back, and after many long, bloody campaigns, they had driven the Neo-Crusaders all the way home to Doksun. Revan determined that an invasion of Doksun was necessary for the war to be won, and huge numbers of Jedi and Republic soldiers were dispatched to the Demon Moon. And so began one of the bloodiest battles in galactic history. The Battle of Doksun lasted for months. The Mandalorians fought tooth and nail for every scrap of territory lost, and Republic forces suffered heavy casualties at the hands of the jungle beasts. Revan's plan was to send in waves of dropships to deploy legions of battle droids first, which would be sent to neutralize the Mandalorians' anti-air defenses, following which the rest of the army would land. But this was only partially successful, and many troop ships were shot down during the subsequent landing, killing many soldiers and Jedi. The rest of the battle was an endless, bloody slog, defined by thousands of feints, thrusts, and sorties all over the far side of the moon, and only Revan knew how it was all meant to fit together. Whatever his plan was, it did eventually work. The Republic slowly but surely gained ground. As they did, the Mandalorians prepared to abandon Dxun, building supply caches deep in the jungle to store equipment in case they returned. When all was said and done, they allowed a few volunteers to stay and fight, while the rest of them abandoned their headquarters, which was mostly leveled by the Republic's final assault. Revan came out on top in the Battle of Dxun, but the cost was staggering. For every Mandalorian who fell, the Republic paid with 10 soldiers. Many Jedi were lost, and many others started to be corrupted by the war. Onderon was liberated shortly thereafter. A year later, the Mandalorians were crushed in the Battle of Malachor V. Soon after that, the Jedi Civil War began. The horrors of the Mandalorian Wars had turned Revan, Malak, and their followers to the dark side, and they became a new generation of Sith, waging war on the Republic. Onderon was spared this war. It was almost as if Revan didn't want to attack it. Once that war was over though, new turmoil started to brew on Onderon and Dxun yet again. It started with the return of the Mandalorians. After the Jedi Civil War, a new Mandalore the Preserver, arose, and he led his clan Ordo, to Dxun. There they set up camp in the ruins of the old Mandalorian headquarters, where they trained new recruits, tested themselves against the beasts of the jungle, and planned to gather the scattered Mandalorian clans. New clans that Mandalore recruited joined Clan Ordo on Dxun, where the Mandalorians made use of the supply caches left from the last war, allowing them to rearm. The Mandalorians stayed on Dxun for many years, but they're not there anymore. They seem to have abandoned the Demon Moon again at one point, though there's no records as to when. But the real threat to Onderon wasn't the Mandalorians, it was the Sith. And once again, the legacy of Freedon Nad was involved. Throughout all the wars that had happened on Dxun up to this point, the tomb of Freedon Nad had mostly been ignored. The Mandalorians didn't even know it was there, and the Republic didn't care. But after the end of the Jedi Civil War, one of the Sith remnants took an interest in the place. They were loyal to a Dark Lord called Nihilus, a lord of hunger, who sought to conquer Onderon to feed on it, and they secretly established themselves on Dxun, building a camp just outside the tomb. A Sith master, not Nihilus but a subordinate of his, set up shop in the crypt of the tomb, where he and his followers practiced dark rituals. This time, not all of the Onderonians were aware of what was happening on Dxun. These Sith had allied with General Vaklu, the second most powerful man in Aziz, who was planning a coup to overthrow his cousin, Queen Talia. At this point in time, the Republic was on the verge of collapse due to the infrastructural damage caused by 3 devastating wars in less than 50 years, and many people wanted their homeworld to strike out on their own, to secede and leave the Republic to its fate. Vaklu was one of those people, but Queen Talia was not. She was a staunch supporter of the Republic, and she remained steadfastly loyal even as her people started to favor separatism. These political tensions quickly pushed Aziz down the path of civil war. General Vaklu and his right-hand man, Colonel Tobin, had a great deal of power in Aziz due to their control of the military and the state media, allowing them to sway a large chunk of the population to their side. But they couldn't win a civil war alone, and they recognized that. Most of the military, even those who agreed with Vaklu, respected the chain of command and supported Talia when the war happened, and Vaklu knew in advance that they would. On top of that, Talia had the support of a Jedi Master, the famed Jedi Guardian Kavar. Thus, Vaklu and Tobin made a deal with the Sith. They would allow the Sith free reign on Dxun in exchange for help winning the Civil War. When Vaklu finally made his move, the Sith carried out a ritual in the tomb of Freedon Nad that allowed them to control the beasts of Onderon. which were pressed into service in Vaklu's army. Between the Sith and the beasts, it seemed Queen Talia was doomed. But a number of other Jedi, led by a former exile, allied with her and the Mandalorians on Daksun, and they helped turn the tide of the war. A joint Jedi-Mandalorian task force stormed the tomb of Freedon Nad, killing the Sith therein and disrupting the dark ritual. This caused the Sith on Onderon to lose control of their beasts, and the tide of the war turned yet again. The Jedi exile, accompanied by Mandalore himself, dropped down to Aziz in a salvaged Basilisk war droid, landing in the merchant quarter and taking the fight to Vaklu's forces. She led the royalists in retaking the sky ramps and then the royal palace itself. Colonel Tobin was killed, and the victorious Queen Talia ordered General Vaklu to be lined up against the wall and shot. The civil war was over, but the cost was high. Aziz lay in ruins, and much of the city's population had been killed. But under Queen Talia, the city rebuilt. Talia's reign was long and prosperous, and thanks to her, Aziz remained in the Republic for millennia. Aziz grew increasingly wealthy and interconnected with the galaxy. Over time, however, the city's distinct culture faded, and the people of Onderon more or less assimilated into the Republic. But the culture of Aziz was made up by some Sith Lords, so you'll forgive me if I don't care all that much. Onderon had some minor crises during the wars of later millennia, including a brief succession crisis during the Galactic Wars that the Sith tried to use as a cover to destroy the Republic fleet in orbit of the planet. Onderon was also hit by an outbreak of mange at one point, which dramatically reduced the population of the local beasts, making it much safer to venture beyond Aziz. They're still like any other cities, but nowadays they are cleared plains that are more or less safe for travelers, many of which contain shrines built by members of the local Unifras religion. Aziz officials still warn visitors not to venture past the tree line though. It's still a very easy way to die.